Chapter 161, Orange in Orange, Second Update. Lucian strolled through the courtyard, absently peeling an orange, a little ritual that helped clear his mind. Since Amy had once been an Auror, he'd already tapped her expertise on apparition, but there was plenty more he could learn from her. Today, he wanted advice on defending himself against the Dementors he'd be facing next semester in Advanced Defense against the Dark Arts. Over a shared bench beneath an oak tree, Amy leaned forward. "You should perfect the Patronus charm," she said, her voice firm. Lucian paused mid-peel. "Why the Patronus? I've got my holy light magic. It's effective against dark creatures." Amy smiled. "No spell rivals the Patronus for pure defense. It not only blocks physical curses but repels spiritual assaults. Dark beings like Dementors, or those Voldemorts you mentioned, simply can't penetrate it. And if you channel it correctly, your Patronus can even carry messages or strike at your foes." He bit into the orange. The citrus tang braced him as he considered her words. True, he trusted his light-based spells, but he'd never tested them against a Dementor's chill. The Patronus charm, by contrast, had centuries of proven success. In ancient Greece, Amy continued, there was a sorcerer named Andros who mastered a giant Patronus. He stood undefeated in duels and earned the title Invincible Andros. His face still graces a chocolate frog card to this day. Finishing the last segment of his fruit, Lucian felt a surge of determination. Mastering the Patronus charm would be difficult. He'd need unwavering focus and a reservoir of happy memories, but it might be exactly what he needed. Tucking his now empty orange peel into his pocket, he shouldered his satchel and headed straight for the Defense Against the Dark Arts wing of the library, determined to track down every text and technique that could help him summon his own guardian of light. However, the Patronus charm is far more demanding than apparition. In the entire wizarding world, only a handful of witches and wizards can even attempt it, and only the truly gifted can summon a fully corporeal Patronus. "That's remarkable," Amy said, her eyes shining. "If you ever need help with any spell in the future, don't hesitate to come to me. As long as I know how it works, I promise I'll teach you." Lucian exhaled with relief when he realized Amy wouldn't refuse his payment. Amy puffed out her chest and gave a confident nod. At that moment, the door swung open, and in walked a brown-haired, brown-eyed witch, carrying a paper bag stuffed with French breadsticks, her features uncannily reminiscent of Sophie Marceau. "Oh, Lena, you're home early," Amy exclaimed, rushing forward to take the breadsticks and embrace her friend. Lena gently disentangled herself from Amy's arms and offered a teasing scold. "I've told you a dozen times, Amy, no more crash courses in advanced magic." "Listen, Amy, it's not as if I can't afford to help you. Why don't you just come live with me?" Lena pressed, her brows knitting in frustration. Amy cleared her throat and held up a hand. "Lena, let's talk about that tonight. For now..." She pivoted and smiled at the young man standing beside her. "This is the student I mentioned. His name is Lucian. Lena, I'd like you to meet him." Lena's expression softened. She stepped forward, leaning in to offer Lucian a warm, maternal smile. "Hello, Lucian. What a fine young man you are. I do wish you were my son." Lucian returned her smile with a polite nod. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Lena." With a triumphant grin, Amy dug into her oversized tote and produced 2 hefty bottles of sherry. "See? I knew Lena would come through with the wine." They settled around the table, plates piled high with roast leg of lamb, crusty bread, wedges of cheese, and 2 glasses of rich amber sherry. Conversation drifted from light-hearted banter to shared laughter as the meal carried on. When the last bite was eaten and the women had sunk into easy chatter, and perhaps one too many sips of sherry, Lucian stood de-stretched. "Excuse me, ladies. I'm going out for a bit." He slipped into the cool evening and followed the lantern-lit path to Magic Street, that famed lane in the French Quarter where arcane bookshops stood shoulder to shoulder. Lucian's heart stirred with anticipation. Somewhere among those dusty shelves lay the tomes he needed to deepen his magical studies, and he wasn't about to let a pair of merry hostesses stand in his way. Lucian paused on Magic Street, scanning the crowds. Everywhere he looked, groups of Beauxbatons students, fresh from their summer break, wandered in their powder blue uniforms, chattering excitedly. He'd never seen so many of them in one place. After weaving through the throng, he ducked into the largest magical bookstore on the block. Inside, floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned under the weight of hundreds of tomes. But to Lucian's disappointment, most titles were familiar. Between Hogwarts's vast library and the shops of Diagon Alley, he'd already read nearly everything of real value. Just as he was about to leave empty-handed, a weathered volume caught his eye. Its cracked leather binding and faded gold lettering read, Legendary Ancient Magic. It wasn't a spellbook or a theoretical treatise, but an unofficial history chronicling powers long lost to the modern world. According to its pages, wizards before Merlin wielded magic so potent they could move mountains, part oceans, and summon meteorites from the sky. Lucian's heart quickened. Finally, something worth reading. He flipped open the first page and dove into the secrets of a bygone era, secrets that might change everything he thought he knew about magic. Long ago, wizards relied on spells that took 10 or even 20 minutes of precise chanting to complete. Over time, these intricate rituals fell out of favor, replaced by swift charms like the disarming charm and the stunning spell. Yet even as ancient magic waned, it retained strengths modern magic could never match. When Hogwarts, the very first school of witchcraft and wizardry, rose on that windswept Scottish moor, its founders wove countless primeval enchantments into its stones. To this day, no other institution can rival Hogwarts' ban on all Muggle technology, its impenetrable anti-tracking wards, its sweeping restrictions on apparition, or its vault of arcane mysteries still beyond any researcher's reach. Lucian paused, pen in midair, then added Legendary Ancient Magic to his shopping list. He couldn't shake the thought that true ancient magic might still be hidden in the world. Perhaps Lily's sacrificial love charm, the very magic that rebounded the killing curse, was one such lost art. Or the jinx Voldemort laid on every defense against the dark arts teacher. Of course, these were only guesses, but what marvelous possibilities they suggested. Lucian paused on the quiet street corner, letting the evening chill settle around him as he reflected on what he'd just read. No reputable history of magic, even the most exhaustive tomes, made so much as a footnote about ancient magic. Yet if ancient magic truly existed, he was convinced he could learn it. Admittedly, in a straight duel, modern spells offered flexibility and speed that older incantations couldn't match. But raw power? Stealth attacks, ambushes, strategic havoc? That was where ancient magic shone. When battles weren't clean one-on-one contests, he thought, those old rites might prove far more practical and devastating than anything in the current curriculum. By the time Lucian stepped out of the bookstore, it was nearly 9 o'clock. To his surprise, Magic Street was still humming with life. He'd grown used to Diagon Alley's early closing hour. Once the last customer slipped away, shopkeepers packed up and the cobblestones fell silent. Here, though, the opposite was true. After dinner, families and students streamed in, seeking enchanted cotton candy, crackling firecracker displays, and street magicians who wove spells into their performances. The scene felt like a familiar night market from his previous life, only transformed by hovering lanterns, sparking fireworks, and holographic dragons twisting through the lamplight. Lucian strolled past stalls where vendors coaxed smiles with dancing lights and levitating trinkets. He savored the easy camaraderie of the crowd, the clap of applause, bursts of laughter, the soft thrum of magic all around him, before finally heading back toward Amy's friend's house. He arrived just before 10, the night's possibilities still crackling in the air. Lucian paused in the doorway, his heart hammering. From the master bedroom came muffled laughter and moans. "Walter?" one voice teased. "Oh yes," came the eager reply. Normally, the house's thick walls would have silenced every sound, but Lucian's unusual constitution had sharpened his hearing beyond the ordinary, and now he caught every intimate whisper. French wizards, he thought wryly, really weren't so different from their Muggle counterparts when it came to privacy. Suppressing a sigh, Lucian backed silently into his own small room and closed the door. Of course, Amy and Lena were in love. Both were breathtakingly beautiful and still unattached at their age. Suddenly, everything made perfect sense. Chapter 162, Letter from the Owl, third update. A month passed in the blink of an eye. Lucian stood in the center of the living room, wand in hand, mind serene and focused, drawing on every joyful memory. From his original life and from the strange detours of his clones, he summoned his inner strength. When he felt his spiritual power ignite, he spoke clearly. Expecto Patronum. A slender beam of white light traced the path of his wand. Bit by bit, more light wove together until a softly glowing, translucent creature took shape. Lucian's eyes widened. It was a panda. He could only guess that one of his clones, who had once been a panda, was responsible for this unusual form. Across the room, Amy sprang up from the sofa. Clad in nothing but lingerie and clutching a bottle of wine, she cheered. "Lucian, that was brilliant. You've actually produced a corporeal Patronus. I always knew you had real talent, and clearly, so do I when it comes to teaching. You promised that in a few days I'd send my resume to Dumbledore and apply for a teaching post at Hogwarts." Lucian hovered in midair, his silver Patronus, an elegant stag darting around him in a soft, ethereal light. Below him, his mentor, Professor Hawthorne, folded her arms and smiled faintly. "I did say that," she replied, watching the Patronus circle him twice more before dissipating. "But don't get your hopes up for this year. Dumbledore has already offered defense against the dark arts to Professor Lupin. Your application won't stand a chance against him." Lucian landed lightly on the polished floorboards and brushed imaginary dust off his robes. He tried to hide his disappointment. "Even so, I've mastered apparition in just over a month, and my Patronus is nearly perfect. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for plenty," she said, stepping closer. "You've improved faster than any student I've ever taught. Quite frankly, I chose a few pupils before you, and they never showed half your talent. You remind me why I became an instructor in the first place." She paused, studying his eager expression. "You'll have to wait until next year. Opportunities in Hogwarts' Defense Department are rarer than dragon's teeth." Lucian let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His eyes drifted toward the window, beyond which the grounds lay silent under a pale moon. "All right," he said. "Then I'll prepare for next year." Professor Hawthorne nodded. "Good. Start by familiarizing yourself with everything you can find on Barty Crouch Jr., the real story, not the Ministry's version. You know who's supposed to teach DA next year, right?" Lucian frowned. "Ollivander Moody?" "Not quite." She tapped a finger against her chin. "Officially, Mad-Eye Moody will return, but in reality, it'll be Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise. His goal is to coach Potter through the Triwizard Tournament and bring about Voldemort's resurrection. That's the plan, at least, the one the Dark Lord's loyalists have set in motion." Lucian's jaw clenched. "And you think I'll help them?" Professor Hawthorne finished. "Absolutely not. If there's one thing I've learned teaching you, it's that you understand the stakes better than most. You won't stand by while Voldemort returns to power. You're exactly the kind of teacher this school needs." Lucian straightened his shoulders. "Then I'll be ready. Next year, Hogwarts will have a new defense instructor, and they'll see exactly what I can do." He smiled, determined. "They won't let Voldemort rise without a fight." Lucian leaned back in his armchair, staring into the flickering embers of the fireplace as he reviewed the latest developments in the wizarding world. Voldemort's return, he reflected, served the Dark Lord little purpose, at least not yet. Stability in the magical community would buy Lucian the uninterrupted time he craved to deepen his own magical studies. That meant no loose ends could be permitted. Unlike the original timeline, Lucian wouldn't allow Peter Pettigrew to slip away. Once Pettigrew was captured and sent to Azkaban, he'd be cut off from Voldemort's scattered soul fragments. Without Pettigrew's aid, Voldemort could never orchestrate Barty Crouch Jr.'s escape and subsequent impersonation of Mad-Eye Moody. And if Moody never applied for the Defense Against the Dark Arts post at Hogwarts, Headmistress McGonagall would urgently need to fill the vacancy. That opened the door for Amy, whose experience as an Auror and instructor on emergency magical care made her the perfect candidate to join the Hogwarts staff. An owl tapped at the window, drawing Lucian's attention. Amy, sprawled comfortably on the sofa opposite him, sighed with mock exasperation as she watched a second bird flutter in. "That's probably another letter for you, Lucian," she teased, tossing her empty tea bottle aside. "You're quite the popular student these days." Lucian glanced over at the second owl, pinning it with his calm gray eyes. In the past month alone, more than 30 letters had flown in, evidence of just how well he'd integrated himself into the school's social life. As he rose to open the window and release the owls safely into the night, Lucian allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Between Voldemort's stalled schemes and Amy's impending appointment at Hogwarts, the balance of power in the wizarding world was shifting, and he intended to ensure it favored those he cared about most. "It's okay." Lucian swung around just in time to see an owl bearing a small package collide with the window pane and slide helplessly down the glass. "Errol from the Weasleys?" he murmured. The bedraggled bird blinking at him was indeed Errol, the Weasley family's famously inept messenger. Lucian tapped his wand to unlatch the window, eased Errol inside, and offered him a shallow dish of water and a scrap of food. Once the owl was settled, he retrieved the package and untied the ribbon. Inside lay a neatly folded letter and an exquisitely carved wooden box. He unfolded the letter first. It was from Ginny Weasley. She explained that her father, Arthur Weasley, had won the Daily Prophet's grand prize, an all-expenses-paid journey to Egypt, and had invited the whole family along. To thank Lucian for the handmade bookmark he'd sent her last year, Ginny had chosen several rare Egyptian spellbooks as a gift. They were now his. As he set the letter aside, a photograph slipped from between the pages. In it, 9 members of the Weasley clan stood before a towering pyramid, every one of them beaming and waving. At the center were Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, tall, bald Arthur beside his short, plump wife, both smiling broadly. Surrounding them were their 6 sons and their daughter, all with fiery red hair. Ron stood in the middle, one arm draped around Ginny's shoulders, and his pet rat, Scabbers, perched contentedly on his other shoulder. Lucian couldn't help but grin. He gently stroked Errol's head, already eager to explore the promised treasures from distant Egypt. Lucian closed the last of the photographs and letters, then lifted the lid of the ornate wooden box. Inside lay 3 strange grimoires he'd never seen in any library or arcane shop, exploring the mysteries of the soul, how to create a ghoul, and the Book of the Dead in Thebes. A satisfied grin spread across his face as he slipped the volumes into his satchel. He set to work at his desk, drafting a reply to Errol. Along with the letter, he tucked in a handful of small magical trinkets he'd picked up on Magic Street, and quietly, the very same ornate bookmark he'd borrowed when he helped himself to Errol's diary. Satisfied, Lucian handed the parcel to Errol, who'd been hovering nearby. Just then, Amy strolled into the room. Spotting the gift-wrapped package in Errol's hands, she teased, "Oh, a present? You never send extras, just letters." Lucian rolled his eyes. "We've only just started our 2nd year. I don't have a girlfriend, if that's what you're implying." Amy settled into a chair, one leg draped over the other. "Come on, who else would you send a bookmark to? It sounds pretty girlfriendish to me." He raised an eyebrow. "So now, you're sure she's my girlfriend?" Amy stiffened for a moment, realizing where the conversation was headed, then quickly steered it in a new direction. "We were talking about girlfriends," she said with a smile. "Children shouldn't fall in love too early. It always distracts them from their studies. But speaking of magic, remember how you asked about the disillusionment spell the other day? Let me run you through the essentials." Before anyone could respond, the door flew open and Lena burst into the room. The sofa squeaked under Amy as she lunged to her feet, heart racing. "You won't believe this," Lena panted, grabbing Amy by both shoulders. "We've found a trail leading to Old One-Eye." Amy's pulse quickened. "Old One-Eye?" "Yes," Lena's eyes shone. "We've been on the tail of a smuggling ring dealing in ancient magical artifacts, and it looks like the mastermind is none other than Old One-Eye, the black wizard who vanished 5 years ago. According to the director's intel, he's planning a meet tonight on Magic Street to trade those contraband items. If we nab him, we can finally clear your name from that scandal." Standing quietly in the corner, Lucian felt his chest tighten at Lena's words. He hadn't pressed Amy for details over the past weeks, but he had pieced together enough from their conversations to know how deeply the old accusation had hurt her. Finally, justice might be within reach, and he'd be there to see it through. Amy had been one of the British ministry's most formidable aurors until the disaster with the dark wizard known as Old One-Eye. He'd been trafficking muggles into twisted experiments in dark magic, and she'd been determined to stop him. But when they finally clashed, 50 innocent muggles were slaughtered in an instant. In truth, Amy had done everything in her power. During the duel, Old One-Eye wrested her wand from her grasp and uttered the killing curse himself. Yet Minister Fudge, desperate to deflect public outrage, needed a scapegoat. Amy was blamed for the massacre, stripped of her rank that very night, and cast out of the Auror office. Since then, she's been trapped in a haze of drink and nightmares, haunted by every life she couldn't save. Chapter 163, Ancient Magic Contraband. I'm going to kill him, Old One-Eye. At the name's harsh ring, Amy trembled from head to toe, not with fear, but with furious resolve. It was that dark wizard who had shattered her once unassailable reputation as an Auror and derailed her ambitions of one day directing the Auror office. Worse still, she'd stood by helplessly while he and his followers butchered 50 muggles, innocents she'd sworn to protect. After her dismissal, Amy threw herself into a desperate hunt for Old One-Eye. But how could a single woman track down an internationally wanted wizard with an army at his back? When every lead ran cold, she sought solace in drink. Night after night, she drowned her frustration in ale, watched her savings drain away, and finally sold her home to take up residence at the Leaky Cauldron. "Amy, don't be reckless," said Lucian, stepping forward and placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Old One-Eye is more powerful than you know. He commands countless dark wizards. You need to rest. Let me handle this tonight." She glared up at him, her eyes blazing. "I can't just sit by while he terrorizes the innocent." Lucian's jaw set in determination. "You won't, but you won't face him alone either. Trust me, we'll bring him down together." For his crimes, the only just sentence is death. Lena folded her arms around Amy, pulling her into a tight embrace. The vaulted chamber of the French Ministry of Magic felt cold and unforgiving. "You must understand," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "The French ministry doesn't do Azkaban. The moment a wizard is convicted of a capital offense, there's no second chances, no appeals, just execution. Voldemort's Death Eaters would have been wiped out years ago if they'd ever stood trial here." Amy's shoulders shook with fresh sobs, her tears soaking into Lena's robes. Across the room, the jury of Aurors and magistrates exchanged solemn looks, as if already anticipating the final, merciless decree. Lucian's attention, however, was drawn elsewhere. Earlier, Lena had mentioned the contraband, ancient artifacts infused with black magic through forbidden alchemical rites, items the ministry strictly forbade. He stepped closer to the wooden crates stacked against the wall. Each one bore the official seal of the French Aurors who'd raided private collectors and underground dealers alike. "Ancient magic contraband," he murmured under his breath. He knew that anyone caught trading these artifacts faced immediate arrest, and at trial's end, a prison sentence was almost guaranteed. In more severe cases, especially if dark enchantments posed a threat, the penalty could be far worse. Lucian glanced back at Amy and Lena. The room fell into a hush as the presiding magistrate rose to deliver the final judgment. Somewhere between the condemned man's pleading eyes and the crates of cursed relics, Lucian felt a chill. In France, justice was swift and ruthlessly absolute. Ancient magic contraband, artifacts unearthed from the tombs of long-dead wizards, rank among the most coveted and the most perilous treasures in the magical world. No one knows exactly how dangerous they are, for many bear dormant curses that can unleash untold havoc if disturbed. Yet their archaeological importance and the tantalizing glimpse they offer into lost branches of magic drive collectors and scholars alike to pay exorbitant sums. Of course, raiding a wizard's tomb is strictly forbidden by the Ministry of Magic. After all, even the greatest sorcerers would resist the idea of their final rest being violated, and no one wants to risk unleashing a curse that could return them to unrest. Still, the stakes are often too high for smugglers to resist. A century ago, an American wizard, tempted by a relic stolen from an Egyptian pyramid, bought it from a black market dealer. Careless handling of its curse resulted in a blast of raw magic that obliterated an entire neighborhood. 300 Nomage lost their lives that night, and the ill-fated purchaser vanished without a trace. From that day on, an wizard found trafficking in ancient contraband faces the harshest punishment the magical courts can impose. In a dimly lit corner of the old ministry archives, Lena leaned closer to her friend Amy, whose hands trembled as she cradled a steaming mug of tea. The low hum of enchanted scrolls and the distant clang of vault gates set a solemn backdrop for their conversation. "You understand why we can't take any chances," Lena said softly. "This isn't just about fines or jail time. One misstep with a cursed artifact could cost innocent lives." Amy stared into her cup, the surface rippling with the reflection of flickering torchlight. "I know," she whispered. "It's just, there's so much knowledge buried in those tombs. I can't help feeling we're losing something important." Lena reached out and placed a reassuring hand over Amy's. "I don't disagree, but archaeologists can do this legally with careful study and proper wards. What these smugglers are doing is reckless. They don't think beyond the payday. We have to protect people, and the secrets of ancient magic deserve a respectful, responsible approach." After a long pause, Amy's shoulders relaxed. She took a steadying breath, nodded, and finally managed a small, grateful smile. "You're right. I'm sorry I panicked." "That's what friends are for," Lena said. She squeezed Amy's hand before letting go. The two of them stood, extinguished their candles, and left the archives side by side. Later that night, under a moonlit sky, Lena crept out of the school's back gate, her cloak drawn tight against the chill. She carried an empty satchel, prepared to gather rare moonwort and nightshades for their next lesson in defense against dark artifacts. The grounds lay silent except for the soft crunch of gravel beneath her boots. Across the lawn, hidden behind a row of witch hazel bushes, Lucian watched with keen blue eyes. He had followed the girls from the archives, sensing that something important was afoot. His wand hand itched with curiosity and concern. What Lucian did not know was that Amy, uneasy about leaving Lena unattended, had mastered a disillusionment charm to shadow her friend without being seen. Now, from his hidden vantage point, Lucian caught sight of a second ripple of shimmer, someone moving in perfect step with Lena, invisible to all but the most perceptive observer. Heart-pounding, Lucian tightened his grip on his cloak. Whatever Lena intended to gather tonight, it was urgent enough that Amy risked a stealth walk under a powerful charm. That alone told him something had changed between the two friends, something he was determined to understand. With one last glance toward the now empty school gate, Lucian slipped from his hiding place and fell silently in behind the invisible figure. The night air tasted of secrets, and as he followed, Lucian vowed he would uncover every one of them. Lucian had learned of the smuggling operation by slipping a disillusionment charm over himself and trailing Lena through the winding lanes west of Magic Street. Amy followed on foot, keeping a discreet distance behind Lena, while Lucian quietly unfurled his enchanted wings and drifted high above the crowd. They suspected that the one-eyed dark wizard was hiding ancient magic contraband somewhere along this stretch, and any clue might lead them straight to it. Their pursuit had ended when led a squad of ministry aurors to a large striped tent flapping in the evening breeze. The entrance bore a painted sign, "Merlin's Marvelous Menagerie, Magical Animal Exhibition." It was the perfect cover. The old wizard had chosen this traveling show as his drop-off point, knowing that the bustle of exotic beasts and curious onlookers would draw attention away from his secret dealings. To a muggle, it might have resembled a circus. Bright banners, a ringmaster's megaphone, and the roar of an excited crowd. But here, wizards served as trainers, and every creature under the big top was drawn from far-flung corners of the magical world. Decades ago, such exhibitions had showcased genuinely lethal beasts, runes, kabars, cat leopards, even the fabled Zulu. Those performances were banned long ago. Today's lineup featured only rare but harmless wonders, the mischievous moon idiots bouncing on glowing stones, the nimble ball-escape birds spiraling through hoops, and the ghostly soundless birds that drifted overhead in perfect silence. Beneath the spectacle, however, Lena and her aurors prepared to expose the dark cargo hidden in plain sight. The Magical Menagerie Troupe is one of the few private groups licensed to use the Tent of Traceless Extension, a precaution the Ministry of Magic insists upon, lest a powerful beast like a Zulu break free and trigger chaos in a crowded street. All summer long, French Magic Street hosts a rotating cast of magical animal circuses, each staking its claim for a week before packing up and moving on. Lucian had attended 2 of these performances early in the break, but after failing to see anything more spectacular than ordinary familiars, he lost interest and skipped the rest. Today, however, he spotted Lena and several Aurors weaving through the ticket line, disguised as everyday tourists. When Amy trailed behind them, dismissing her disillusionment charm before stepping up to the box office, Lucian tucked away his invisibility spell and joined the queue himself. Inside the tent, a complex web of anti-trespass enchantments filled the air. Disillusionment spells fizzled out moments after being cast, and apparition was strictly barred. The troupe had sealed every loophole, determined to keep both unscrupulous wizards and unpredictable creatures from slipping in or out undetected. As Lucian settled into his seat, he wondered which rare beast might finally make its debut under the flickering lanterns. Lucian pushed aside the tent flap and blinked into a dazzling spectacle. Hundreds of wizards, apprentices clutching their parents' robes, crowded the interior. It was Saturday, and the adult magicians, off duty for the weekend, had dragged their youngsters along to marvel at the show. From the outside, the tent looked no larger than a modest circus booth. Inside, however, it stretched out like one, or even two football fields. Along its length, stages hosted magical beasts performing in timed intervals. Levitating owls, flame-breathing drakes, and spectral stags danced through hoops of fire. Between performances, vendors hawked enchanted treats and novelties. One stall offered marshmallows the size of shields. Bite into one, and your body felt as soft as cotton. Another sold skyfire fireworks. Pull the cord, and you'd burst aloft into sparkling forms, phoenixes, fire dragons, or thunderbirds, before gently drifting back down. A few stalls even blew giant floating bubbles for a single silver sickle each, drifting like iridescent moons above the crowd. Lucian threaded his way through the throng, peering around floating embers and drifting bubbles, searching for his companions, Lena and Amy. The two girls had slipped into the crowd moments ago and were nowhere in sight. Finally, he spotted a low platform, climbed onto it, and scanned the swarming mass of brightly colored robes. He still didn't see them, but he wasn't worried. He knew that with a little patience, he'd spot those familiar faces yet. Lucian's instincts told him exactly where the Aurors and Dark Wizards would clash, and sure enough, not 30 minutes later, a tremendous explosion rocked the tents 6 pitches down from him. Instantly, a booming voice, amplified by a loudspeaker spell, cut through the chaos. Ministry of Magic Aurors, Dark Wizards, surrender now. All uninvolved wizards, evacuate the tent at once. Panic erupted. Dozens of startled wizards poured out, stumbling toward the exits. As the crowd thinned, Lucian made out the tense tableau on the stage beyond. On one side stood Lena and her fellow French Ministry Aurors, wands at the ready. On the other, a small band of dark wizards led by an old man with a single malevolent eye. Between them, a cluster of ordinary wizards huddled as hostages, shields against any immediate assault. Everyone held their breath. Neither side dared strike first. Any reckless move could cost innocent lives. Yet in the electric stillness of that standoff, the real battle was only just beginning. Chapter 164, The Little Wizard is Fierce, Part 5. Lucian picked his way carefully along the debris-strewn path toward the raised platform, his stomach twisting as he made out the hostages pinned there. 4 adults and 3 children, one of them Hermione Granger. He'd known Hermione was traveling in France over the summer. They'd exchanged letters. But she'd said she was heading to Dijon, not Paris. What was she doing here? Enough! The lead Auror shouted from nearby. He was a solidly built man in his 40s, wand trained steadily on the lone, one-eyed wizard holding the hostages. Drop your wand and release them, or we won't hesitate to take you down. The one-eyed wizard laughed, that harsh, rattling sound echoing across the platform. He pressed his wand hard against Hermione's temple. Go on, try it, he taunted. I promise you, I'll kill them before any spell of yours reaches me. And remember, among my captives are 3 underage wizards. One wrong move, and they all die. A tense silence fell. Lucian's heart thundered in his chest as he drew his own wand. He glanced back at the Aurors arrayed behind him, then forced himself to stare down the old wizard. This was the moment to act. Let's see how you explain this to your superiors, Lucian sneered, his single pale eye glinting beneath the hood. For over 20 years, he'd been the most wanted dark wizard in the world, and he'd staged scenes like this countless times. Always, the Aurors backed down to protect their own. A few years ago, a stubborn female Auror had refused to yield. In response, Lucian slaughtered 50 muggles. She'd been dismissed, left to bear the blame. The current captain clearly didn't want the same fate. Damn it, the Auror captain ground out, hesitation flickering across his face. He'd underestimated Lucian's vigilance. They'd only managed to form half a cordon before Lucian realized the trap and snatched hostages. Releasing them now was unthinkable, but so was keeping them. Lucian's lips curved into a mocking smile. He raised his wand, voice low and controlled. Avada Kedavra. The killing curse shot forward in a streak of green light. It struck the fat wizard Lucian still held captive. His body collapsed, lifeless, to the cobblestones. Lucian tucked his wand away and let the echo of the spell fade. Hesitating, are we? He taunted, stepping forward into the widening circle of stunned Aurors. Auror Captain Lucian stood his ground as the one-eyed warlock raised his wand, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. Very well, the old man sneered. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll start killing one hostage every 10 seconds, until you change your mind. He began the countdown before Lucian could even draw a breath. 9, 8, 7. By the time the warlock reached 5, Lucian's composure cracked. All right, release half of them, right now, he shouted. How am I supposed to trust you? You've slaughtered hostages after escaping before. The warlock's single good eye narrowed. You're not qualified to negotiate with me, he hissed. Lucian planted his feet and lifted his wand again, voice steady despite his pounding heart. Then I'll stay here with you until the ministry fires me. The other man shrugged, amused. Fine, but you won't be leaving this platform. With a curt nod, he signaled to his henchmen. 3 adult wizards stepped forward from the circle of armed guards and stumbled away, freed at last. Lucian ordered his Aurors to part, creating a clear path. Clutching the remaining 3 underage hostages, the warlock backed toward the tent's exit, every step deliberate and unflinching. As the flap of the tent rippled behind them, Lucian steadied himself for whatever came next, determined not to let another life be lost on his watch. Lucian watched the Death Eaters shepherd Hermione and the 3 young witches toward the tent's entrance. If they reached the flap, they could simply apparate off Magic Street, and the Aurors would never catch them. That wasn't going to happen. The old one-eyed wizard barked orders, his wah, and trained on Hermione's trembling shoulder. Lucian's pulse quickened. He couldn't stand by and let his friend be taken, or worse. And he wasn't about to lose the chance to question the ancient sorcerer himself about forgotten magics. Then Lucian's gaze flicked to a mirrored door leading to the performer's dressing room, a plan crystallized in his mind. He slipped through the canvas flap behind the stage, hashing past colorful cloaks and stage props until he found a tall, ornate mirror hanging on the back wall. Drawing a steady breath, he raised his wand and whispered the incantation he'd been perfecting. Mirror world, open. The glass shimmered like disturbed water. Lucian tapped it once more, held his breath, and plunged into the rippling surface. He stumbled out onto smooth wooden boards in the parallel realm of the magician's apprentice. His panda familiar, his mirror image ally in this world, awaited him. The creature's bright eyes glowed with anticipation, proof that it had been watching Lucian's back all along. Together, they would turn the tables on the Death Eaters and rescue Hermione, no matter what it took. Lucian had spent the past weeks meditating to sharpen his magical prowess, and in the process, he'd mastered 2 powerful spells, Mirror Realm and Mimicry. Mirror Realm allowed him to slip into any reflective surface and traverse a ghostly duplicate of the real world, emerging at the mirror's exit to catch his enemies unawares. Now, under cover of darkness, he prepared to rescue Hermione and 2 other underage witches from the clutches of the one-eyed master and his 5 dark wizards. A polished brass shield marked the entrance to their forest encampment, perfect for casting his mirror spell. Lucian whispered the incantation, and in an instant he vanished from sight, entering the silent, lifeless reflection where every object stood reversed. He sprinted through this mirror world to the mouth of the canvas tent. There he crouched, invisible to the naked eye, waiting. 30 seconds later, his quarry appeared, the one-eyed master at the front, flanked by 5 black-cloaked wizards, each gripping one of the kidnapped girls. Hermione stumbled along between 2 of them, her face pale with fear. Outside, a squad of aurors had formed a perimeter, wands raised and ready. The dark wizards paused at the tent's entrance, preparing to drag their captives inside. Lucian took a steadying breath and in a flash stepped out of the mirror's surface. "Expelliarmus!" he cried, thrusting his wand forward. A jet of scarlet light struck the wizard holding Hermione. The man's wand flew from his hand with a crack, and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Hermione gasped, stumbling free, as the aurors surged forward to subdue the remaining kidnappers. In the moonlit clearing, Lucian stood guard over the rescued witches, wand at the ready. The ambush had succeeded, and the night was finally safe once more. Lucian's left hand didn't stay idle. With a roar, he slammed it into the dark wizard who'd pinned the young witch against the wall, sending the man hurtling across the chamber. The force of that blow, easily the equivalent of 4,000 pounds, would have crushed any ordinary foe. Only the wizard's unnatural constitution kept him from being pulverized on the spot. Before the stunned sorcerer could even scramble to his feet, Lucian whipped out his wand. "Avada Kedavra!" he shouted. All four dark wizards froze for the briefest instant, thrown by the sheer ferocity of his assault. The one-eyed brute still clutched the trembling witch at his side, helpless to intervene. But the other three were battle-hardened killers. In perfect unison, they raised their wands and unleashed 3 green shafts of the killing curse straight at Lucian's heart. He moved like a shadow. As the emerald bolts hissed past, he twisted aside, each curse carving empty air. In one seamless motion, he lunged forward. From his right wand came a sharp Expelliarmus. 2 of the wizards' wands exploded from their hands and skittered across the marble floor. Simultaneously, he traced a swift rune with his left hand. A gleaming arrow of pure white light sprang forth, driving the third dark wizard backward into the wall with a shattering crack. Dazed and disarmed, the 3 stood motionless, their expressions frozen in disbelief. Lucian lowered his wand, chest heaving, eyes blazing. He had arrived just in time. Lucian watched as 2 more attackers fell, one struck squarely by a disarming charm, the other impaled by a dart of pure light from the old wizard's wand. With that, all 3 witches, including Hermione, were safe. Only one of the Black Wizard's lieutenants and the one-eyed veteran remained. But then Lucian noticed something strange. Throughout the entire skirmish, the one-eyed man had never once launched an attack. Since the very first surprise strike, he'd merely stood there, muttering unintelligible spells under his breath. That made no sense. Amy was no weakling. Anyone strong enough to defeat her and snatch away her wand clearly possessed real power. He shouldn't still be hesitating now. Chapter 165. The thunderstorm is coming. Come out! Lucian's voice boomed through the dimly lit tent, shattering the uneasy calm. In one swift motion, he unleashed a spray of brilliant light magic, dropping 2 dark wizards to the dirt floor. Then, with a flourish, he summoned his spectral blade, its pale glow slicing through the filth-streaked air, as he advanced on the last hooded figure and the one-eyed man holding hostages. But before Lucian could strike, a sharp voice rang out from the tent's far corner. "Let go of them." Amy, an auror assigned alongside Lucian under Captain Lena, leapt forward, lunging from behind a tumbled stack of crates. She had anticipated the old wizard's ploy, using terrified civilians as a shield to force a safe exit. While Lena negotiated at the tent's entrance, Amy had slipped away, crouching by the rear flap and studying every twitch of the sorcerer's trembling hostages. Now, her wand flared with emerald light, snapping the old man's crooked dagger from his grip. Startled, he stumbled back, his single good eye widening in shock. Seizing the opening, Lucian danced past the crumpled corpses of the first 2 dark wizards and struck the last sorcerer's staff with a clean, glowing arc. The staff shattered, and the dark mage collapsed, powerless. With enemy spellcasters disarmed and their leader disoriented, the hostages, wide-eyed and breathing ragged, took tentative steps away from the fallen one-eyed man. Outside the tent, the rest of Captain Lena's team burst in, wands at the ready, voices echoing confidence. Within moments, both dark wizards lay bound in glowing restraining runes. The old one-eyed man, robes rent and face twisted with fury, spat curses into the dust before finally slumping in defeat. Lucian sheathed at his blade, chest rising and falling with exertion. He met Amy's gaze and let out a relieved breath. "Perfect timing," he said, offering her a tired grin. Amy brushed soot from her cloak and nodded. I saw him for what he was. Good thing you cleared the others so quickly. A sudden crack of thunder rattled the canvas overhead, and rain splashed through the torn flaps. Outside, lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the battlefield in strobing silver. Turning his head toward the storm, Lucian frowned. The skies opened up, he murmured, but I've got a feeling the real storm is still to come. Even so, the old one-eyed man proved to be a seasoned dark wizard. As he muttered an unfamiliar incantation, he tapped his robe, and in an instant, a shimmering armor spell flared to life around him. It was clear he hadn't donned an ordinary wizard's cloak today, but one pre-enchanted for protection. His companion fared far worse. Lucian's blade had severed his hand, robbing him of any ability to weave magic. When Lucian's disarming curse struck, the armor spell deflected it, and the one-eyed sorcerer seized the moment to burst out of the tent. Amy, Lucian, we've warded the entire length of Magic Street against apparition. He can't get away. After him. Lena's voice rang urgently through the gloom. They had all seen Lucian's surprise attack to free the captives and sprinted toward the conflict at top speed, but they still trailed by a dozen meters. Amy sprang forward the instant she heard the command. Lucian pivoted back to Hermione, who stood nearby, shaken but uninjured. With a small, respectful bow, he asked, "Are you all right?" Hermione blinked at him, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I'm fine." Hermione had been touring France with her parents, their last stop Dijon, when she received Lucian's letter. He was in Paris on his own trip. Impulsively, true to her sometimes spoiled nature, she persuaded her father to reroute their journey so she could visit him. On her very first afternoon in Paris, Hermione arrived at a traveling magical creature show, only to find the arena erupted in violence. Dark wizards burst in, dueling aurors amid startled hippogriffs and snarling chimeras. Before she could escape, they dragged her inside the big top and held her stage. She'd faced a basilisk before, and though it had petrified many, no one had actually died. But here, she watched in terror as a green jet of light struck an auror dead on the spot. Panic clawed at her throat until, like a guardian angel, Lucian appeared at the tent flap. His wand hand was steady, his voice low but commanding. Within heartbeats, he'd driven the dark wizards back, binding the last one in shimmering ropes of silvery light. As the intruders fell into retreat, Hermione found herself free and trembling. "This is the second time you've saved me," she whispered, cheeks burning, as Lucian ducked out through the side entrance without a backward glance. "Miss Weasley? Are you all right?" one of the aurors called, stepping in with Hermione's worried parents at his heels. To Hermione's astonishment, the supposed adult wizards the aurors had fought so fiercely to free turned out not to be magical at all, but muggles, her own mother and father, safe at last. "Do you know the boy who just rescued us?" As the two freed girls hurried over, the taller sister glanced at Hermione and asked again. Hermione studied them, one older, one much younger, and answered with a touch of pride, "We're all Hogwarts students, and we happen to be very good friends." The older girl offered a grateful nod. "I'm Fleur Delacour, a fifth year at Beauxbatons, and this is my sister Gabrielle. We came to see the Magical Creatures exhibition and never expected to run into danger like this. Had it not been for him," she turned to the boy standing nearby, catching his eye, "we might not have walked away unscathed. He was simply amazing." Hermione smiled warmly. "His name is Lucian. He's a first year here at Hogwarts. I'm Hermione Granger, a second year. Lucian's one of the finest young wizards at our school." Lucian felt a flush of pride at Hermione's words, though he couldn't say exactly why it mattered so much to him. Lucian and Amy burst out of the tent and froze in their tracks. The one-eyed old man stood smack in the middle of the street, a twisted grin playing under his scarred eye. He didn't flee. Instead, he raised his wand aloft and chuckled darkly. "Finally," he hissed. "This ancient magic is a cumbersome ritual, but oh, its power is worth the wait. Watch closely." He began to spin his wand in wide circles above his head. As he did, the sky over the magic street darkened ominously. Thunder rumbled, deep and resonant, and Lucian felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. "Ancient magic thunderstorm," the old man intoned in a voice that vibrated with energy. Instantly, bolts of crackling lightning ripped through the clouds. Jagged forks of white fire lashed out, illuminating shop windows and rattling shutters. The majority of the street was bathed in blinding light and thunderous roar. In the moments before this, the old man had sensed that the aurors would prevent any apparition along the main thoroughfare, blocking escape routes. To be safe, he'd begun the lengthy incantation the instant he and his hostages left the tent. The spell's slow buildup belied its ferocity now. Raw elemental force converged at his command, threatening to tear the entire street apart. Lucian and Amy barely had time to steady themselves as the sky seemed to crack open above them. Lucian tightened his grip on his wand. He knew he might not be able to slay the aurors hot on his heels, but he could at least keep them busy long enough to vanish from Magic Street. Moments ago, a sudden attack by the auror woman and her young companion had nearly shattered his concentration, but he just managed to finish his spell in the nick of time. "What kind of magic is this? It isn't ordinary weather control," one of the aurors gasped as a churning storm coalesced above them. Brilliant forks of lightning lanced through the sky, each bolt so fierce it could splinter solid wood. Lucian unleashed his ironclad ward, a rippling sheath of metallic darkness, just as a thunderbolt struck the tent beside him, shredding its canvas walls in an instant. Behind their own, Ards, Amy, and the other aurors pressed back, eyes wide with alarm. None dared close the distance. The air crackled with raw electricity. Lucian allowed himself a small, dangerous smile. Ordinary weather spells coaxed clouds or gentle snowfall. This was something far more primal. He had tapped into the storm's living wrath. Another jagged bolt ripped through the tent's remains, scorching the ground at his feet and sending a spray of embers into the night. The shockwave rocked shields and rattled bones. Amy staggered backward, brushing ash from her robes, while the other aurors formed a hesitant circle around Lucian. "Surround him! Don't let him escape!" Amy ordered, her voice wavering, yet none advanced. Each lightning strike knocked them farther off balance. Sensing his moment, Lucian's eyes glittered with grim triumph. He gathered the storm's power for a final, shattering blow, then his lips curved into a predator's grin. With a soft word of power, the air around him shimmered with stolen electricity, and in a flash of blinding light, he was gone. The Iron Aegis trembled violently, its enchanted seams beginning to fray. Every movement beneath the ward grew more labored by the second. Then, with a deafening crack, a jagged bolt of lightning tore through the circular tent that housed the menagerie of magical creatures. Canvas and poles were ripped apart, and wizards, beasts, and equipment were flung out onto the slick cobblestones. A mad cackle rose above the chaos. "I'll kill you all, every last one of you," Old One-Eye cried, brandishing his wand with a cruel flourish. His single glass eye gleamed as he summoned a relentless storm of thunder and bolts of raw energy. The barrage struck everyone in its path. Hermione Granger and her terrified Muggle parents still pinned under the faltering Iron Aegis. Fleur Delacour and Gabrielle struggling to shield the panicked creatures. Even the wizards from the Fantastic Beasts exhibition, who had thought themselves safely concealed, were caught in the onslaught. The Iron Aegis was no simple charm. Only the most skilled aurors or select ministry operatives could sustain it under duress. None of the menagerie's performers were prepared for this. Outside, the sky roiled with dark clouds, and with only 2 days left before the month's end, Lucian knew that things could only get worse. If they didn't rally soon, Old One-Eye's rampage would consume them all. Chapter 166, The Shocked Aurors, Second Update. Light Element, 3 Divine Pillars. At Lucian's command, he spread his wings and soared above Hermione and the others. A brilliant magic circle flared into being overhead, and 3 columns of radiant light descended, forming an immense protective dome around the group. Even the assembled wizards, Old One-Eye, still crackling with thunder and lightning at the edge of the clearing, among them, fell silent in astonishment. Bathed in pure, holy white light, and with wings shimmering beside him, Lucian seemed less a wizard and more an angel from Muggle legend. He raised his voice so it carried through the barrier. "Why are you standing there gaping? Cast the super protective charm, now!" Though he'd withstood the storm's full force only briefly, Lucian knew those bolts of thunder were far too powerful to hold at bay for long. He glanced down at Amy, Lena, and the aurors, all staring upward in stunned silence, and bellowed, "Move it!" At last, Amy and the others snapped out of their daze. Wands at the ready, they wove the intricate gestures and muttered the precise incantations, reinforcing the luminous dome just as the next volley of crackling thunderbolts descended. Ultimate protection, total protection, block the enemy's attack. The aurors pooled their magic, directing it skyward to form a vast protective dome above Magic Street. Within that dome, 3 radiant pillars sprang up in Lucian's place, absorbing the thunderous strike. The one-eyed old man realized immediately that Lucian had tapped into something extraordinary. His face drained of color as he whipped out his wand, spun on his heel, and sprinted toward the central exit arch. If he could slip through that stone portal onto Muggle Street, he could disapparate safely, beyond any auror's reach. "Not so fast," Lucian called, watching the old man's retreat. As the aurors sustained their unified defense, Lucian dispelled the 3 pillars. At his own command, an iron-like armor encased his head, and he unfurled his hidden wings. With a powerful thrust of magic, he shot after the fleeing figure. Lucian had originally hoped only to glean clues about ancient magic from this elusive man, but now, witnessing firsthand the raw potency of his arcane powers, he was determined not to let him escape. Still, he pursued with caution, staying just close enough to prevent the old one-eyed man from vanishing into thin air. Once old One-Eye had slipped out of sight of the pursuing aurors, he broke into a run. After putting some distance between them, he surged forward again and cut Lucian off. "You insolent whelp," he growled. "You're begging for death." Lucian hovered in midair just ahead of him. The one-eyed wizard abandoned his struggling lightning charm, raised his wand, and hissed, "Avada Kedavra!" A jet of brilliant green light shot at Lucian with terrifying speed. Lucian ducked and rolled through the air, narrowly evading the killing curse, then landed lightly on the ground. He took a steadying breath. Old One-Eye's power was clearly on another level. His timing and the velocity of that curse had nearly caught Lucian off guard. Before Lucian could even brace himself, Old One-Eye unleashed a second Avada Kedavra. But Lucian was already moving. He twisted aside, swept his wand into position, and shouted, "Expelliarmus!" A flash of crimson energy streaked from Lucian's wand toward the old wizard. Lucian's spell flared toward Old One-Eye, but with a casual flick of his wand, the dark wizard sent the glowing bolt careening harmlessly aside. Before Lucian could recover, another curse slammed into him. He staggered, swearing under his breath, "There are too many obstacles." An invisible barrier snapped into place around him, sapping his speed until he moved at less than half his power. Old One-Eye's obstruction hex. Simple but brutally effective. As potent as Lucian's magic already was for a first-year student, his raw talent rivaled that of an average auror. He still had a long way to go before he could compete with a master of dark arts like this one-eyed veteran. But Lucian had more on his side than pure magical skill. "The divine edge, shadowless," he called, voice ringing with authority. He swept his wand in a graceful arc, and 8 ethereal blades, so pale they seemed almost invisible, sprang to life around him. In the blink of an eye, they darted outward, converging on Old One-Eye from every direction. The old wizard's single eye glittered with amusement. "Impressive strength for someone so young," he said, one hand raised to deflect the onslaught. "But you must forgive me if I'm still a little ahead of you." Convinced that Lucian was using a simple kinetic charm to hurl those blades, he hurled his palm forward and intoned the Incendio Glacius, the freezing flame spell. A frosty wind roared from his wand tip, coating the translucent blades in jagged shards of ice before they could reach him. The elemental chill cracked through the divine edge, splitting several of the arcs in half, and the remaining fragments shattered like glass against Old One-Eye's protective barrier. Lucian skidded backward, shaking himself free of the obstacle's lingering grip. He gritted his teeth, the thrill of challenge stoking his determination. This duel was only just beginning, and he intended to show the veteran exactly why they called him the student with a destiny. "All fixed," Lucian called, voice ringing out as a surge of arcane power burst from his wand. Old One-Eye's icy barrier shook, its frozen wards straining against Lucian's 8 spectral blades. The frost held, just barely, but the next assault proved too much. Lucian unleashed the Divine Edge Shadowless Curse, its nearly invisible blade of energy slicing through the ice and grazing Old One-Eye's right wrist. The old wizard cried out as the curse severed his wand-wielding finger. Anticipating a desperate, wandless counterspell, Lucian traced a new circle in the air. A ray of light, rings of brilliant runes bloomed overhead, then rained down in razor-bright shafts. They struck Old One-Eye's back with thunderous force, pinning him face first to the stone floor. Lucian vaulted forward and planted a foot beside the fallen sorcerer. Legilimens! A chill wave of psychic energy erupted from Lucian's mind, piercing Old One-Eye's consciousness. Lucian sifted through memory after memory, visions of secret rituals, hidden runes, until at last he found what he sought. "Found it," he whispered. He leveled his wand in one swift motion. "Somnus!" A sleep curse, soft as a sigh, drifted into Old One-Eye's mind. The old wizard's eyelids fluttered, then closed. His body went limp, sinking Lucian's shoulder as he collapsed. Kneeling, Lucian rummaged through the folds of Old One-Eye's robe and produced a small, battered grimoire, no thicker than a diary. Its faded gold letters spelled out the title clearly, the Book of Spells to connect heaven and earth and unleash thunder and lightning. It was the ancient thunder and lightning incantation that Old One-Eye had just unleashed, an arcane storm he'd uncovered 2 years ago in the tomb of a 3rd-century wizard. Lucian's heart pounded. "Quick, copy it," he barked. He flicked his wand in a precise arc, reciting the copying spell he'd recently mastered from Amy. In an instant, a perfect duplicate of the spellbook materialized in midair. Lucian snatched the clone, hurled it toward his dressing room, then handed the original back to Old One-Eye with an even smile. The copying spell could duplicate non-magical objects flawlessly, every page, every rune identical to the original. Its only flaw was endurance. Once the borrowed magic faded, the copy collapsed into ordinary parchment, and any experienced wizard could sense the difference at a glance by probing the residual mana. No sooner had Lucian settled the books than Amy, Lena, and a team of aurors burst into the chamber. Their robes billowed, wands raised, eyes wide. The thunderstorm had ceased abruptly, and they'd feared Lucian had been struck down while chasing Old One-Eye through the vaulted halls. After all, the old sorcerer's power was renowned across the magical world. "Lucian, are you all right?" Amy cried, rushing forward. He met her worried gaze, let out a breath, and gave a reassuring nod. The real battle for that forbidden spell had only just begun. Lucian's voice was firm as he wove the counterspell, a pale silver light spiraling from his wand to staunch the bleeding of the one-eyed man. He'd seen far too many victims succumb to the shadowless spell. He refused to let this one die. Footsteps echoed behind him. Lucian spared a glance for Amy and the other aurors from the French Ministry of Magic as they hurried forward. He straightened, lowering his wand. "Relax," he said evenly. "He's not dead, just unconscious." Amy's gaze flicked from the fallen figure to Lucian's calm profile. She drew a breath and knelt beside him. "We're not worried about him," she said quietly. "We're worried about you." The other aurors froze, rifles and wands forgotten at their sides. They knew Lucian was gifted. He just liberated hostages and conjured protective wards that saved them all. But to watch him face down the world's most wanted dark wizard, alone and unafraid, and defeat him in single combat, especially when this victor looked no older than 11 or 12 years old, it left them utterly speechless. Chapter 167, Ancient Magic That Binds Heaven and Earth, 3rd update. "You know what? After everything that's happened, I'm completely exhausted." Having just healed the one-eyed elder, Lucian stood unsteadily, leaning on Amy as she rushed to support him. His voice was barely more than a whisper when he addressed Captain Lena, the head auror. "Captain, I'd like to head back and rest if that's all right." His earlier display of dramatic fatigue had been a ruse. Now he simply needed an excuse to slip away. In truth, his mind was racing. He couldn't wait to return home, transfer the text he'd copied from the ancient grimoire, and pore over it in private. A touch of genuine wariness would explain his hasty departure without arousing suspicion. Captain Lena, a seasoned auror, recognized Amy at once and understood the bond between Amy and Lucian. She offered him a kindly nod. "Of course, Lucian. Thank you again for your help today. Amy, please escort him back. We'll handle the old warlock here." Lucian managed a tired half-smile and nodded gratefully. If it hadn't been for his quick intervention, that cunning, cruel, one-eyed wizard might have escaped, or worse, harmed innocent people. In Captain Lena's mind, she owed both him and Amy a great debt. As Amy guided Lucian away, he felt relief wash over him. The sun was dipping low, and the streets of the capital were bathed in dusky gold. Every step took him closer to the privacy he so desperately needed, and to the secrets hidden within the ancient tome he'd risked so much to copy. Tonight, nothing would stand between Lucian and the knowledge he sought, not fatigue, not danger, and certainly not the watchful eyes of the Aurors. Lucian trudged along between his teammates in the early evening light of Paris. News of Old One-Eye's capture had spread like wildfire. This would surely earn him a hefty promotion. "Yes, Captain!" he heard Lena cheer from behind him. Lena was practically beaming as she and Amy moved up on either side, ready to steady him on the walk home. But within a few steps, Amy realized that propping him up under the arms was slowing them to a crawl. With a good-natured grin, she swept Lucian up into her arms and carried him horizontally. At 11 years old, he wasn't especially heavy, but the sight drew curious glances from passers-by. Lucian flushed with mild embarrassment, but he'd had a long day of chasing dark wizards, so he quietly let Amy shoulder him. Just then, they passed the smoldering remains of the destroyed tent where the final confrontation had taken place. Out of the haze came Hermione Granger, jogging forward, her parents close behind her, and two of the rescued young witches in tow. Lucian caught Amy's eye and wordlessly signaled her to set him down. Amy complied, and Lucian straightened his robes, offering Hermione a wry smile. "I'm just a bit worn out from the chase," he explained. "Give me a moment. I'll be fine once I catch my breath. By the way, Hermione, weren't you supposed to be in Dijon?" Hermione giggled. "My father decided Paris was the real capital of France, so he insisted we come see it for ourselves. I tried to talk him out of it, but no dice." Mr. Granger's eyebrows shot up in astonishment as he exchanged a look with Mrs. Granger. Lucian couldn't help but laugh. Only Hermione Granger could turn a routine mission debrief into a geography lesson. Lucian frowned. When had Hermione said she wanted to visit Paris? Hadn't she been the one pleading to reroute their journey so they could come here? He opened his mouth to protest, but Hermione simply shot him a mischievous wink and raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Well, which hotel are you staying in?" she asked lightheartedly. "I've been here over a month now. I know the city like the back of my hand. If you have time, I'd love to show you around." Lucian merely nodded, unwilling to argue. At that moment, Fleur and her husband Gabriel stepped forward, thanking him profusely for his help and insisting he join them for dinner. Lucian declined with polite firmness. He still didn't believe that the two young witches he'd rescued were in fact Fleur's half-sisters, all part Vila and hence Ron Weasley's sisters-in-law by marriage. After bidding farewell to Hermione and Fleur, Lucian allowed Amy to escort him home. She helped him into his small bedroom and laid him gently on the bed. "I'll be fine with a little rest," he murmured. "You two should head to the Ministry of Magic right away. This is our best chance to force that man to tell the truth. Don't let it slip through your fingers." Once Ellie and Lena have left the ministry, Lucian plans to examine the replicated ancient magic tome he's been waiting for. Lena gave a curt nod. "Don't worry. If the old man still won't talk, I'll make sure he gets a full dose of truth serum." "Lucian, thank you. Thank you so much." Amy's voice wavered with relief. She stepped forward, pressed a soft kiss to Lucian's forehead, then turned and followed Lena out of the tent. In that moment, she felt more grateful to Lucian than she ever had to the Auror captain. She'd always assumed Lucian was simply a precocious scholar, bright, reserved, and entirely absorbed in his studies. Love and loyalty, she'd thought, were strangers to him. Yet here he was, risking everything to chase down a dangerous, one-eyed old man, alone and unarmed, just to help clear her name. The very idea was almost too moving to believe. In truth, Lucian never involved himself in other people's affairs. His sudden appearance at the magical creatures showcase, the way he'd shadowed Amy and Lena, it was clear he'd heard their strategy and decided to lend a hand. Confronting that grizzled old man had been no small feat. One misstep could have turned deadly. Amy met Lucian's steady gaze. "You're my teacher too, you know," she said quietly. "I'll do whatever I can to repay you." And with those words, she stepped out into the night, confidence renewed by the unexpected loyalty of a friend she'd only just begun to understand. Don't take it too seriously. Lucian wiped the damp sweat from his brow and realized Amy had completely misread his words. He chose not to correct her. Instead, he offered her a warm smile. You're a natural with words. I can't imagine how many little witches you'll charm when you grow up. Amy pinched his cheek, her eyes glistening, then stood and slipped out of the room with Lena. At the doorway, Lena bent down and brushed a gentle kiss across Lucian's forehead. Thank you for looking after Amy. As their footsteps faded down the staircase, Lucian rolled onto his side and sat up in bed. He knelt on the floor, traced a small Morgana ring with chalk, then retrieved the copied volume on ancient magic. He pored over its pages until dawn. Finally, he closed the book with a soft sigh. So that's how it works. This text was indeed a treatise on pre-modern sorcery. Although its sole practical lesson was a lightning spell, the true revelation lay in its theory. Ancient mages drew power from elemental sources, channeling raw energy into their incantations. Modern wizards, by contrast, base every spell on their own blood magic, quick to cast but limited in potency. Lucian now understood the fundamental divide between the two traditions. Ancient magic uses the practitioner's own blood as a catalyst to tap into the fundamental laws that bind heaven and earth. By chanting prolonged incantations, the caster slowly merges with nature itself, summoning vast elemental forces to do their bidding. Such power is tremendous, but it takes time to release. Take, for example, the lightning magic the One-Eyed Elder unleashed earlier. He spent 7 or 8 minutes reciting ancient verses to commune with the storm clouds overhead, then channeled that energy into a sustained bombardment of lightning. Only in that light does the Wild Chronicles claim in legendary ancient magic that one can move a mountain with ancient spellcraft make sense. A magician's personal reserves are finite. Nature's, on the other hand, are virtually limitless. Unless your own magical strength surpasses the very forces of the world, you simply cannot outperform a ritual that draws directly on elemental power. Reading through the ancient grimoire had elevated Lucian's understanding of magic to an entirely new level. It wasn't until nearly noon the next day that Amy and Lena returned home. They were in high spirits. After interrogating the old one-eyed man through the night, he finally confessed to every crime. His testimony cleared Amy's name, allowing her to return to her post as an auror. That very morning, the sentenced man, now convicted of all his atrocities, had been executed. Chapter 168, The Youngest Medal of Valor Winner, 4th Update. 3 days later, Lucian stood beside Amy on the raised dais in the grand hall of the French Ministry of Magic. Below them, a sea of aurors in midnight blue uniforms and ministry officials gathered, flanked by roving reporters from magical publications around the world, most notably the Daily Prophet. Enchanted lanterns hovered overhead, casting a warm glow on crimson banners that bore the fleur-de-lis. The French Minister of Magic, a dignified woman with silver-streaked hair and kind but resolute eyes, stepped forward. In a single graceful motion, she affixed a gleaming medal of bravery to each of their robes and handed them each a satchel containing 1,000 gold galleons. On behalf of the French Ministry of Magic, she announced, her voice echoing through the hall, I award the French Medal of Bravery and 1,000 gold galleons to Lucian and Amy for their extraordinary service in capturing the dark wizard Rodriguez Maddox. Your courage has safeguarded our community, and you are always welcome in France. As her words faded, Lucian and Amy raised their wands in salute. Cheers erupted from the crowd, accompanied by the rapid clicking of magical cameras. In that moment, Lucian felt pride surge through him. He was officially the youngest recipient of France's highest honor for valor. After the dust settled, Comtesse Lena de Fleur lifted the gleaming medal of courage and smiled at Lucian. Lucian, you're officially the youngest recipient of this honor in all of French history. Lucian returned her smile, the medal warm in his palm. Thank you, Comtesse. It was well earned, and I certainly couldn't have done it alone. At his side, Amy beamed, a leather satchel heavy with 1,000 gold galleons slung over her shoulder. Tonight's on me, she announced. Let's celebrate at the finest tavern on Magistry Lane. Lucian tapped the pouch appreciatively. Weren't you supposed to return to England? He asked. The Auror captain told the British Ministry of Magic about that confession from the old one-eyed man. They've not only rescinded your dismissal, they've reinstated you. Amy drew herself up, hands on her hips. They've gone further than that, she said proudly. I've been promoted to Deputy Director of the International Magical Cooperation Department, but I've deferred my appointment until after summer break. I promised to give you lessons all summer, and I intend to keep that promise. Lucian gave a mock bow. You've more than earned your title, he said. You're perfectly qualified to be my teacher. Lucian grinned and returned the thumbs up. Amy's promotion to Deputy Director of the International Magical Cooperation Department was excellent news. Not only was she likely to become director in the next few years, but her rise meant Lucian had yet another powerful ally at the ministry. After all, Barty Crouch Sr. was edging toward retirement, or worse, and Amy's new position would only solidify her influence. Between Tonks and her team in magical law enforcement and Ludo Bagman in magical games and sports, who'd roped him into a friendly Quidditch match, Lucian already boasted an impressive network. Now he could count the Deputy Director of International Cooperation among his friends, a bond that might prove crucial in the trials to come. Remarkably, he'd only just begun his second year at magic school, yet his foothold in the ministry had never been stronger. So he stayed on in France, refining his spellwork by day and delving into powerful ancient magic by night, all under the radar. Hermione often popped over to wander the enchanted streets with him, their easy companionship a welcome respite. Those carefree weeks slipped by in a pleasant haze, until, inevitably, the new term's first bell began to toll. Lucian knelt on the dewy grass of the school's garden courtyard, eyes closed, tracing the invisible currents of natural energy that flowed between heaven and earth. He could almost hear the hum of raw power as he followed the instructions of Number, the ancient grimoire, in his mind. Just then, a voice called out from the walkway above. Lucian, I've located the friend you wanted me to find. He opened his eyes as Professor Camden strolled down from the teaching building, a faint smile playing on his lips. So, Lucian said, rising to his feet, our school is getting a new teacher. He let out a soft chuckle. That means my wand will be fitted with a new core. Slipping his phone from his pocket, Lucian tapped the screen to catch up on the world beyond the campus gates. Between supervising his 3 sets of clones across different realms and delving ever deeper into his magical studies, he hadn't stepped outside or checked the news in days. He'd been blissfully unaware of the latest moves in S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra until now. His eyes widened as a headline loaded, Tony Stark's secretary Pepperpotts appointed CEO. Lucian frowned. It seemed even in this universe, the game was changing, and not just for magic. Lucian flipped through the headlines, scrolling across his tablet. Is this the beginning of Stark Industries' decline? Tony Stark attacked at Monaco Stadium, assailant subdued. An accompanying photo showed Iron Man's armored fist extended, razor-sharp claws slicing through the attacker's weapon. Another banner declared, Stark seen wandering mansion, mental health concerns mount. He barely registered the sensationalism. Nick Fury wouldn't let Iron Man slip through the cracks. Hydra or no Hydra, Fury would prod Tony if he had to. And frankly, Iron Man's predicament was straightforward. Study Howard's old schematics, isolate a new element to replace the failing palladium core, problem solved. Lucian tapped into Fury's private server, quickly locating the archived research. Found it, he murmured. Switching tabs, he landed on another explosive story. Green monster rampages at Calvo University, Army forces routed. He clicked the embedded video. On screen, a colossal, emerald-skinned Hulk hoisted a military jeep overhead, its engine still sputtering, before sending it crashing into a line of retreating soldiers. Below the footage, the comment section was ablaze with giddy speculation and dark humor. Leaning back, Lucian folded his arms. Stark needed help, Banner needed containment, and Fury needed a plan. But first, he'd review the research on that new element. Time was running out. Most people insist the video is computer-generated. Countless armchair analysts have already declared it a hoax. Even the few students who claim they witnessed the incident in person aren't taken seriously. It's just another odd clip to watch for kicks, like those old viral videos of a ghostly figure appearing in a thunderstorm, a dragon slurping water out of a canal, or a flying saucer hovering overhead. Unless it's a full-blown catastrophe, think the New York invasion, which was impossible to conceal, the government and media can always spin these things into oblivion. Lucian snapped his phone shut. He couldn't quite shake the image of Bruce Banner disappearing from the battlefield under General Ross. After that fierce clash, Banner had whisked his girlfriend off to New York to find Dr. Stern. Rumor had it Stern's antidote could strip the Hulk gene from his DNA and return him to normal. Banner had never said which university Stern was at, though. Greyburn University, Professor X replied when Lucian finally asked. It's in Manhattan. Lucian's eyebrow arched. That's it? Professor X leaned forward, his gaze intense. There's more you should know. Inside Banner sleeps a soul consumed by rage, one that won't stay dormant forever. Do you need my help? Professor Xavier asked. Lucian leaned back, considering. He'd already told Xavier that he'd entered Bruce Banner's mindscape using the brainwave amplifier and knew exactly how to calm him. After a moment, he asked, Where's Steve? I haven't seen him in 2 days. Steve said he wanted to visit some friends this weekend, since there are no classes, Xavier replied. He won't be back until tomorrow. He used, then added, I've already cleared it with him. You can't hide the fact that he's Captain America from Natasha or from S.H.I.E.L.D. Natasha knows that Carter isn't dead, which is why she took leave to visit him after his hospitalization. Professor Xavier met Lucian's eyes. Since Steve's away, I should stay behind at the school. You handle things here. It isn't a big problem. Lucian nodded. For the safety of the students, at least one of them needed to remain on campus. Relying on Wolverine alone, with his tendency to charge in first and think later, was too risky. Chapter 169. I'm Lucian, Principal of the Superpower Academy. 5th update. Alright, be careful. I'll stay here on campus. Nothing will go wrong on my watch. Professor Xavier offered no further objections to Lucian's plan. He trusted Lucian's abilities implicitly. True, Lucian's psychic power paled beside Xavier's own, but in every other respect, Lucian's skills more than compensated. And if he did run into trouble, escaping would be child's play for him. Thanks for everything, Lucian said with a confident nod. It won't take long, Professor Xavier replied. Rising from his chair, Lucian spoke the words of the apparition spell. In under 2 seconds, he disappeared. Professor Xavier assumed Lucian was off to recruit Bruce Banner as a guest instructor, someone to help shoulder the teaching load. What Xavier didn't suspect was Lucian's real objective. He needed a single strand of the Hulk's hair. In the magical world, the Hulk's rage-fueled strength would classify him as a humanoid magical creature, more powerful than giants and potentially more formidable than even the fiercest dragons. Such raw, ever-growing power would make the Hulk's hair an extraordinary wand core. And that, above all else, was why Lucian had apparated away so swiftly. Lucian now commanded 3 clones, each one even stronger than his original body. They shared his exact physique and magical reserves, but their wands offered no real amplification. They only matched the casting speed of an ordinary wand and provided virtually zero boost to raw power. By comparison, the most potent wand he'd ever encountered came from the fairy tale world, amplifying magic more than 20-fold. Next in line was the Magician's Apprentice's ring, which tripled one's magical output. The weakest of the lot was the Harry Potter-style wand, barely doubling the spellcaster's innate power. So, alongside his step-by-step magic training and his ongoing efforts to increase his personal strength, Lucian's top priority became clear. Forge a superior wand, one that might even unlock a brand new ability or branch of magic. Another new ability, or entirely new magic, Professor Xavier murmured under his breath as Lucian vanished from view. In truth, Xavier had long suspected that Lucian's astonishing feats weren't all mutant powers. A quick glance through the study materials folder on the school's computers had confirmed his suspicions. Still, he kept his discoveries to himself, watching quietly as Lucian pursued his next magical breakthrough. Lucian saw no need to press the issue. When George claimed it was a mutant ability, he accepted it at face value. He wasn't the sort to swallow tall tales. He wasn't Wolverine, after all. And even though his psychic powers weren't what they used to be, his instincts for sizing people up remained razor-sharp. After all this time together, Lucian knew George was far less gentle than he appeared. But so what? At least George wasn't evil. If he were, he could have shed these burdens long ago and walked away free. Ever since the body transfer, Lucian had been replaying his life in his mind, second-guessing every choice. If he hadn't trusted humanity so wholeheartedly, if he'd shown more ruthless resolve toward anti-mutant factions, maybe mutants would never have faced near extinction, and countless friends wouldn't have endured unspeakable experiments. Yet even that harsher path might not have led to a better world for mutants. Lucian still had no answer, and perhaps never would. After all, you can't know the ending of a road you never travel. Every crossroads carries its own regrets. So for now, he decided to wait, to choose only when he absolutely had to. He resolved then and there to entrust his own fate, and that of the children, to Lucian, the school's headmaster. From now on, whatever Lucian decided, he would obey without question, provided it never crossed his own moral boundaries. After all, if not for Lucian's efforts, they might all be dead by now, and even if some had survived, who could say how many would have been twisted into living that weapons or experimented upon in cruel laboratories? With that thought, his anxiety eased. Lucian was the guardian of the school, charged above all with the children's safety and education. High above Manhattan, not far from the sleek facade of the Stark building, Lucian materialized out of thin air. He'd never ventured into Manhattan's heart before, only the Bronx, and his only familiar landmark here was the Stark building, where he had accompanied Pepper on his last visit. Without hesitation, he apparated directly to its rooftop. Completely invisible, he murmured, weaving a silencing illusion spell around himself. Then, flexing his wings, Lucian leapt into the sky and soared off toward Greyburn University. Lucian hovered above the academy grounds, scanning for any sign of General Ross's troops. Seeing none, he flicked his wrist and whispered, "Footprints revealed, Bruce Banner." A pale glow traced Banner's hidden footsteps across the courtyard. Dispelling his illusion, Lucian drifted down to the grass below and followed the glowing prints to the laboratory wing. Inside, he climbed to the third floor and knocked firmly on a heavy door. "Hello? Anyone here?" After a brief pause, the door cracked open to reveal a short, middle-aged man in a blue lab coat. He peered at Lucian with mild annoyance. "Look, buddy, I'm swamped with work. If you need help with class, come back tomorrow during office hours." Lucian folded his arms. The man assumed he was just another student. In fact, Lucian looked barely 20. "I'm not here for study help, Doctor. I'm looking for Dr. Bruce Banner." "Bruce Banner?" The scientist's brows shot up. "There's no one by that name here." He stepped forward, about to close the door. With one hand on the frame, Lucian halted him. Then, gently but firmly, he eased past and slipped inside. Dr. Stern stammered in protest, but Lucian's calm eyes made it plain. He wouldn't be turned away. Lucian stepped into the modest living room and took a seat near the draped windows. "Dr. Banner, there's no need to hide behind those curtains," he said calmly. "I come in peace. I'm neither government nor military." After a tense moment, Banner emerged from behind the fabric, flanked by his partner Betty and Dr. Stern. He eyed Lucian warily. "Who are you? And how did you find me here?" Leaning back, Lucian gave a small, confident smile. "I'm Lucian, headmaster of the Superpower Academy. As for how I located you, that's simply part of my gift. When I set my mind on finding someone, there's nowhere they can hide." Banner frowned. "The Superpower Academy? I've never heard of it." He exchanged puzzled glances with Betty and Dr. Stern. "That's all right," Lucian replied. "You'll understand soon enough." He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Almost immediately, the water dispenser in the corner sprang to life. 4 glasses filled in quick succession and hovered through the air, settling gently on the coffee table in front of them. Lucian gestured to the glasses. "Please, help yourselves. While you drink, I'll explain everything." Lucian leaned back in his chair and offered, "Tea, coffee, or perhaps something stronger, like wine." Before anyone could answer, he snapped his fingers. Instantly, droplets of water gathered in midair, filling the empty cup. The cup then hovered silently across the table and settled perfectly before Banner. Bruce Banner and the 3 foremost minds in the global scientific community gaped at the display. Sleight of hand might baffle a child, but not experts of their caliber. This was no simple trick. Some piece of cutting-edge technology must be at work. Chapter 170, A Forced Melon is Not Sweet. If you prefer to call it magic, then so be it. Lucian gave a wry smile. He raised a hand, murmured the transformation incantation, and the 4 paper cups of mineral water before him shimmered. In an instant, each cup's contents darkened into steaming coffee, then floated through the air to land neatly in front of the 3 onlookers. As you requested, coffee. The 3 guests exchanged glances, then lifted the unadorned cups and inhaled deeply. The rich, unmistakable aroma told them it was genuine coffee. No chemical shortcuts, no hidden filters, just pure brew. Magic shows sometimes employ gadgets hidden in specially prepared vessels or color-changing additives to simulate coffee. But these were ordinary paper cups, nothing concealed, nothing out of place. And Lucian stood before them in simple attire, with no hint of wires or devices tucked into his robes. There was simply no trickery to be found. They set their cups down in stunned silence. Lucian, for his part, sipped his own coffee with a satisfied nod, as if to say, "See? Magic." Lucian set down his coffee and leaned forward. "Let's start with the basics, our school. The Superpower Academy, just as the name suggests, is a place for people with extraordinary abilities. We recruit both students and teachers whose gifts go beyond the ordinary." He paused, meeting Bruce Banner's eyes. "Dr. Banner, you clearly fit our criteria for a superpowered instructor. That's why I've come today." Noticeably, Lucian never used the word mutant. From the moment the Academy opened its doors, he'd eliminated the term. With the government publicly treating mutants as comic book fiction and everyday people convinced they didn't exist, why stir up controversy? Inside these walls, everyone with abilities, whether student or staff, would simply be called a super. After all, gifted or not, they were still human. One of the 3 men bearing the banner name glanced at the others. "Superpower," he repeated, and all 3 looked at Lucian, eyebrows raised. Bruce Banner cleared his throat. "Mr. Lucian, let's not quibble over whether your school is real. Even if it is, I'm not a super. I suffered physical injuries in a series of biological experiments, nothing more." Lucian's voice remained steady. "Then tell me, what in your mind defines a superpower?" Lucian paused to consider Banner's question. "You're picturing powers like in the comics: fire, ice, magnetism, teleportation." Banner shook his head. "No, at our school we define superpowers more broadly. Any ability that exceeds normal human limits, whether that's flamboyant elemental control or sheer physical strength and resilience. A mutation that lets you transform into the Hulk is every bit as valid as someone born with telepathy. Even if your power was gained through experiments, it still fits our hiring criteria for instructors." Banner waved his hand dismissively. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in teaching. Today I have a chance to excise the green gene entirely. Dr. Stern's serum works. Once I'm human again, neither General Ross nor S.I.L.D. will bother me. Betty and I can go back to Calvo College and finally leave this behind us." He met Lucian's eyes firmly. "Thanks, but no thanks." "Of course there's no obligation," Lucian said with an easy smile. "Our academy never forces anyone to join. If you'd rather not enroll now, that's perfectly fine. We'll find each other again if you change your mind." Banner hesitated, then firmly shook his head. Lucian simply nodded, and before anyone could react, vanished in a shimmer of light. Banner and the 3 other scientists gaped at the empty space, hearts pounding. Teleportation wasn't just a rumor, they had witnessed it themselves. As some of the world's leading researchers, they knew such technology was impossible with today's science. High above the research facility, Lucian hovered invisibly, watching the scene unfold. He decided not to follow or prod them. Someone coerced into compliance never commits wholeheartedly. It would be far more effective to let Banner's curiosity draw him in on his own terms. After all, Banner still clung to the hope that joining this mysterious academy would somehow restore the ordinary life he longed for, and sooner or later he would come back. Lucian pressed his forehead against the cool glass and watched the sun slip behind the academy's towers. He'd just come to a grim realization. Even if they gave him every dose of that experimental serum, he'd still turn into the Hulk, and if he refused, General Ross would lock him away for study. His only escape was to join the Super Academy, and all he had to do now was wait. Inside the specially outfitted lab, Dr. Stern, Bruce Banner, and Betty Ross were putting the finishing touches on their plan to eliminate Bruce's gamma gene. Lucian hovered just outside the window as Banner was strapped onto the steel operating table. Stern injected the first serum. Moments later, Banner convulsed, bones cracking and muscles bulging until the lab echoed with the Hulk's roar. Betty knelt beside him, murmuring soothing words through the gaps in his shred shirt. When Stern finally administered the second shot, the green giant's massive form collapsed, shrinking back into Bruce's human frame. Lucian's heart raced. "Finally," he whispered, relief flooding him. His triumph was cut short by the rumble of distant footsteps. Through the lab's windows, Lucian watched squads of soldiers swarm the campus. Students and faculty were being herded from the courtyards, while snipers with tranquilizer rifles took up positions on every rooftop. Inside, oblivious to the armed incursion, Stern, Bruce, and Betty erupted into a heated argument, unaware that they were now under siege. Dr. Stern's laboratory buzzed with activity long after Banner had left. Using the fresh blood samples Banner had unwittingly provided, Stern had made dozens of copies, each one containing the same potent green gene. His goal? To manufacture a universal cure-all and secure a Nobel Prize, fame, and fortune in one fell swoop. When Banner discovered what Stern was up to, he was horrified. He knew better than anyone the terrible power of the green gene. This wasn't a miracle cure, he warned Stern. It was a monster serum that would spawn abominations beyond imagining. Once it fell into the wrong hands, like those of General Ross, it would shatter global stability and ignite countless wars. Banner pleaded with Stern to destroy his work. He reminded the doctor of all the places he'd fled, countries where armies had tried to harvest his power to build unstoppable super soldiers. He told Stern that once you unleashed the gene's destructive potential, there was no putting it back in the bottle. Their argument erupted in shouts. Stern refused to be swayed. He was certain the world needed his panacea. Banner clenched his fists and stepped forward, desperation in his eyes. Suddenly, the lab window shattered. A dart, bathed in a faint green glow, whistled through the air and struck Banner squarely between the shoulder blades. He gasped, froze, and collapsed to the floor in a dead weight. Before Stern could react, the door burst open. Emil Blonsky, his eyes alight with cruel anticipation, shoved Dr. Stern aside and yanked Banner to his feet by the throat. Betty screamed from the corner, but Blonsky only sneered. "It's time, Hull," he growled, but Banner's eyes blazed with the coming storm. In that moment, the air crackled, the lab's fluorescent lights flickered, and somewhere deep inside Banner, a terrible green force began to stir. Lucian's roar echoed across the empty hangar the moment he realized the Hulk hadn't shown up. He had been humiliated by the Hulk once before at Calvo University, and ever since Dr. Stern had given him that incomplete super soldier serum, he'd been itching for a rematch. The serum had already amplified his strength far beyond human limits, and now, with no green rage monster to challenge him, Lucian felt his pride bristle like a live wire. "Where is he?" Lucian bellowed, fists clenching. Beth, or anyone could answer, a squad of armed soldiers stormed in. In their grip, bound tightly, was Bruce Banner. Under strict orders, they hauled Banner toward the exit, ignoring his muffled protests. Lucian's eyes followed the line of soldiers. He wanted to stop them, but at the same moment, a furious Bronsky cornered Dr. Stern in a shadowed alcove beyond the hangar doors. "You promised me equal power," Bronsky snarled, shoving the doctor against the wall. "Doctor," Stern's glasses glinted in the harsh light as he stammered, I'm working with an untested sample. It could kill you." Bronsky produced a syringe filled with a luminous green fluid, the extracted gene sequence of the Hulk's blood. "Inject it, now." Under Bronsky's glare, Dr. Stern had no choice. With trembling hands, he plunged the needle into Bronsky's arm. Bronsky hissed as the serum coursed through his veins. Immediately, veins darkened under his skin, muscles bulged, and a bestial grunt tore from his throat. Lucian watched the transformation from across the hangar. He saw Dr. Stern step back in shock, and Bronsky flex new, savage strength. Yet Lucian did not move to intervene. His gaze stayed fixed on the soldiers carrying Banner away, his anger deeper now, fed by betrayal, pride, and the looming fallout of what had just begun. Chapter 171, Magic to Contain the Hulk, Second Update. Lucian couldn't very well prevent the abomination from appearing. Indeed, he'd arranged for it. His goal was to draw the Hulk out one more time, force Banner into total retreat, and in the process secure an unbeatable guardian for the school. Admittedly, the abomination lacked the Hulk's ability to grow stronger with rage, but its raw power was still impressive. Even more important, ML Blonsky could shift seamlessly between his human and monstrous forms, never splitting into two conflicting personalities as Banner did. Still, Lucian wasn't idle while chaos reigned around him. When the abomination's fist sent Dr. Sten sprawling across the lab floor, Lucian watched carefully to ensure that none of the Hulk blood replica splattered onto Sten's head. That single drop could have triggered the birth of a new Titan, something Lucian would never allow. After the abomination vaulted from the laboratory's shattered window, Lucian slipped back inside. Dr. Sten lay unmoving amid debris and broken glass. Lucian knelt beside him and began to weave a complex incantation. "Once you forget," he murmured, "everything becomes empty." A soft silver light shimmered around Sten's temples as Lucian completed the Oblivion spell. In an instant, every memory of Bruce Banner, every trace of the Gamma gene, dissolved from the doctor's mind. Lucian rose, satisfied. The threat of another green behemoth was gone, for now. Lucian hauled Sten and the unconscious soldiers out of the laboratory and dumped them unceremoniously onto the pavement. He leveled his gaze at the smoking ruin behind him, raised a hand, and uttered a single word. Lihuo. Brilliant blue flames roared into being, licking hungrily at the walls and windows. Lucian needed to make absolutely certain that the army would never recover the Hulk's blood, or any of the research within. There would be no traces left behind. Under his command, the inferno consumed every combustible surface, then even the stone and steel structure crumbled to ash. No ordinary water or firefighting crew could have touched it. Within minutes, the laboratory was obliterated. Satisfied, Lucian dampened the spell and lifted into the air, gliding toward the street. Below, two colossal figures, one in emerald green sinew, the other a towering mass of molten yellow, clashed in a ferocious brawl. Sparks showered down the boulevard as the two giants exchanged blow after thunderous blow, drawing every soldier and bystander's attention. Lucian hovered at the edge of the chaos, ready to make his next move. Lucian was still corralling panicked bystanders when the helicopter above burst open. Banner hurled himself out of the hatch, midair, only to grow twice as big, twice as green. The Hulk had returned. "It's time to finish this," he roared and slammed into the abomination. The two monsters clashed, hurling cars and tearing boulders from the pavement. Then the abomination backhanded the Hulk through a storefront window. Lucian seized his chance. He beat his broad, feathered wings and dove between them. At arm's length, he wove a quick sound amplification spell. Golden runes shimmered around his throat as he shouted, "Stop! Now! If you keep this up, you'll level the entire street." The spell hit like a sonic boom. The abomination's fist froze in midair. The Hulk's chest heaved, his roar strangled off. Even General Ross and the soldiers crammed into the helicopter staggered, clutching their ears. "Who is that?" one soldier gasped. Betty leaned out beside Ross. "He's Lucian, Dean of the Superpower Academy." Ross's eyes narrowed. Superpower Academy. He'd never heard of it. He remembered Betty's story. Lucian could turn plain water into a perfect cup of coffee and then vanish without a trace. Now here he was, wings unfurled, calling off two of the planet's strongest monsters with a single spell. Ross exhaled. Enemy or ally, this winged man had just stopped a battle that would have flattened half the city. For the moment, Ross decided to hold his fire and watch. "Is E here to help?" "I think so," Betty replied, her voice uncertain as she peered down at the chaos on the streets below. They exchanged a worried look. Where did this Birdman come from, and why is he meddling in other people's fight? Before they could speculate further, a guttural roar split the air. The abomination, a towering, grotesque behemoth, reared back and with a single massive swipe sent Lucian flying. Anyone who attempted to intervene would have faced instant death. Lucian landed on his feet, brushed himself off, and offered the creature a wry smile. "You've got quite the temper." The abomination, undeterred, raised its fist again, a blow that could flatten a car. Lucian simply lifted his hand and called out, "Hanging hook!" A tendril of crimson magic shot from his palm, forming into a curved, hook-shaped lariat. It struck the abomination beneath its arm and instantly flipped the monstrous figure upside down, suspending it high above the ruined pavement. How How can this be? The abomination bellowed, claws scrabbling at the invisible tether. It thrashed violently, summoning every ounce of brute strength, but the spell held firm. 5 long seconds later, the magic released, and the abomination crashed back into the rubble. Lucian strolled forward, hands tucked into his coat pockets. Maybe you should consider losing some weight, he quipped, casually dusting dust from his sleeve. He wasn't surprised the hook had failed to hold indefinitely. His alloy bracelet could channel magic, but it didn't amplify it, so hauling a creature of that size upside down was always going to be a struggle. Lucian touched down lightly on the street, his wings folding neatly behind him. The abomination, towering, misshapen, and clearly enraged at being toyed with, let out a bestial roar. With a heave of its massive arms, it ripped a nearby car in half and hurled both jagged halves toward him. Lucian raised his hands calmly, channeling his arcane power. The fragments of twisted metal struck an invisible barrier around him and splintered harmlessly to either side. Not a single burn or chip touched his cloak. With a soft thud, he landed on the asphalt, hovering just above the ground. Fueled by rage, the abomination charged, its heavy footsteps rattling the pavement. Lucian pointed at its legs and murmured the incantation for his signature leglock spell. In an instant, the creature's knees locked stiff. It pitched forward and skidded across the road, coming to rest at Lucian's feet. Before the monster could wrench its limbs free, Lucian's eyes glowed with a pale blue light. He reached out, weaving intricate sigils in the air, and let loose a barrage of 30 stunning bolts. Each bolt struck the abomination's forehead in rapid succession, stars dancing behind its eyes. Finally, with a shuddering groan, the creature collapsed, its consciousness slipping away. Lucian stepped back, arms folding as he surveyed the fallen foe. Over 100 weaker spells might have rattled him, but a mage's precision and a single, well-timed strategy was more than enough to silence even a hulking brute like the abomination. With the threat neutralized, Lucian turned and vanished into the night, his victory as effortless as it was decisive. Lucian watched the abomination lunge at him, claws outstretched. The creature was enormous, slightly stronger than the biggest beasts he'd ever faced, but it couldn't fly and had no ranged attacks. All it had was raw, close-quarters strength. With a quick series of precise strikes, Lucian brought it down. Turning his attention to the Hulk, Lucian nodded to himself. He knew the green giant wasn't a mindless monster, just hot-tempered and unlikely to harm anyone who didn't provoke him. Hulk glanced over at Betty in the escape helicopter, then flexed his fists, as though ready to depart. "Wait a second," Lucian called, spreading his wings. With a burst of speed, he soared above the Hulk's head. Drawing a slender blade from his belt, he snipped off a handful of the Hulk's thick hair and tucked it into his Arnold dressing space. The Hulk roared in fury and spun around, delivering a massive punch. Lucian leaped back, narrowly avoiding the blow. "All right, that's enough," Lucian said with a grin. "Time to change back." He pointed at the Hulk's scowling face and whispered, grinning. In an instant, the spell took hold. The Hulk's anger melted away, and he threw back his head, laughter rolling out in deep, booming peals. Lucian's laughter echoed through the clearing, and in an instant, the Hulk's colossal frame began to shrink. His green skin faded, muscles receded, and moments later, Bruce Banner stood before him, blinking in surprise. The truth was simple. The angrier the Hulk grew, the stronger he became, but the second his fury ebbed, he reverted to Banner. That weakness was exactly why Lucian had crafted a bespoke tickle charm to bring the green giant down. "Besides," Lucian said, lowering his wand, "the Hulk has virtually no resistance to psychic magic. Remember how Scarlet Witch subdued him in the movies? A well-placed Imperious curse, or any mind control spell, would work just as effectively." With a graceful flick of his wrist, Lucian murmured, "Repair as before." The shredded fabric of Banner's jacket and trousers hummed softly, knitting itself back into place until his clothes looked brand new. He stepped forward, giving Banner a hopeful look. "So what do you think? Interested in joining the Superpower Academy?" Banner ran a hand through his hair, glanced down at his restored outfit, and then met Lucian's gaze with a firm nod. "I'm in." Chapter 1172, The Principal's Power. Third update. Right after the helicopter touched down, Bruce Banner knew the truth. Even if he could somehow purge himself of the Hulk, he'd never be free to live a normal life with Betty. As they flew back from the desert test site, General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross had made it brutally clear, lose the Hulk, and Banner would spend the rest of his days behind bars. Worse still, Dr. Stern's experimental serum wasn't a cure. It couldn't excise the gamma gene. Banner might suppress the transformation for a time, but the Hulk was a permanent part of him. Imprisonment loomed, and S.H.I.E.L.D., not to mention every Black Ops outfit that coveted his power, would never stop hunting him. Then a better option occurred to him, the Superpower Academy, where Lucian had established himself as both student and benevolent overseer. There, Lucian's abilities could safely trigger Banner's transformation and withdrawal, keeping bystanders out of harm's way. And under the Academy's protection, Banner might finally evade, or at least postpone, the relentless pursuit of Ross and his allies. Banner turned to Lucian. "All right," he said. "I'll go with you." Lucian's eyes brightened. "Excellent. Let's head back to the Academy right away. Once you're settled, you'll take over our advanced physics course. That'll free Charles up to focus on day-to-day security, so we'll all be better off." With Banner's reluctant agreement, Lucian gave him a firm, reassuring nod. Together, they strode away from the waiting chopper and toward the armored escort vehicle, destined, as they all were, for the strange new life that awaited at the Superpower Academy. Lucian's wand flicked through the air as he whispered, "Wingardium Leviosa." Immediately, Abomination's massive form trembled, then rose off the ground, suspended by an invisible current of magic. Lucian spared a glance at Bruce Banner, now back on his feet, and braced himself. He needed to get both Banner and the hulking creature back to the school grounds before the military closed in. Unfortunately, his apparition skill would only carry him and one companion at a time. Hauling two people, especially one the size of Abomination, was beyond his current limits. "Hold it right there! You can't leave!" A roar of rotor wash shattered the tense silence as a military helicopter descended, whipping dust and debris around them. General Thunderbolt Ross strode out first, flanked by Agent Betty Ross and a phalanx of soldiers. Simultaneously, the troops who had been hiding during the clash between Abomination and the Hulk surged forward, encircling Lucian's small group. General Ross advanced with steely purpose. "This operation, these creatures, they're classified military assets. You're not taking them anywhere. You'll be coming with us for a full debriefing." He gave a tight nod to his men. In an instant, 100 rifles were leveled at Lucian, Banner, and the levitating behemoth. Ross's eyes glittered with ambition. If he could secure both Banner's alter ego and Abomination, he'd have the raw material to engineer an army of super soldiers, far more powerful than Captain America's, and tip the scales of power for whichever nation held them. Lucian's heart pounded. The moment for escape was fleeting. With soldiers all around, he would have to draw every ounce of magical strength and cunning he possessed, or risk losing everything. General Ross's gaze hardened on Lucian. "I don't care that he saved us," he snapped. "This man's abilities are far too unusual. He could be a mutant, exactly the kind of specimen my research division would love to study." Betty's eyes filled with disbelief. "Father, what are you saying? Lucian protected us. How can you even think of locking him up?" She shoved past the nearest soldier and slipped her arm through Banner's. Banner managed a weak, thankful smile in her direction. Lucian calmly took a step back from the tense standoff. "General Ross, there's no need for confrontation. We simply want safe passage back to our team." He glanced at Betty, fearing her a friendly nod. "By the way, Dr. Ross, my academy still needs a biology teacher. If you ever decide it's time for stable work instead of running from one crisis to the next, I'd be honored to have you on staff." Betty shot her father a defiant look, her voice steady. "I'd be delighted to accept." Ross's face turned grim as he tapped the radio clipped to his belt. "Escort Miss Ross home," he ordered his men. "Then detain Lucian and his companions. Bring them back to the base." 2 guards moved in on Lucian's group while the surrounding soldiers leveled their rifles. Lucian sighed, half amused. "Honestly, you guys never learned to tell the major players from the minor ones. Take Nick Fury. At least he waits until he's absolutely sure before poking the hornet's nest." Lucian's lips curled into a cold smile. "You saw how effortlessly I dealt with the men you couldn't handle, and yet here you are, daring to challenge me. Do you take me for a pushover or a fool? With a subtle motion of his hand, his magnetic powers flared to life. Every rifle in the soldiers' hands ripped free, clattering through the air before locking back on their owners, barrels pressed against their temples. Now, Lucian said, his voice low and hard, drop to your knees, hands on your heads, and don't you dare move. He paused, letting the silence stretch. If it weren't for your connection to one of our school's teachers, I'd have you suspended naked in midair all day, so you'd learn the true meaning of shame. As the soldiers obeyed, dismayed and humiliated, Lucian shook his head in exasperation. Sometimes he couldn't help but be speechless at the blind arrogance of the nation's top brass. Nick Fury was the same, vainly confident in his own power, but at least he wasn't as reckless. If the world had to count on nothing but bureaucrats and red tape, villains would have wiped us out ages ago. We wouldn't have had to wait for Thanos to show up. General Thunderbolt Ross's jaw tightened as he leveled a furious stare at Lucian. If it weren't for his desire to make a good impression on the two new instructors, he might have risked everything to teach this upstart a lesson today. Ross knew that with his current power, Lucian could easily brush off any threat from ordinary individuals or organizations. Only the likes of the Ancient One, Odin, or Captain Marvel might give him pause, especially now that Lucian had mastered teleportation. "Sir," Lucian said coolly, "please lower your weapon. If you go through with this, you'll become a wanted man across the country. Even if you don't care about yourself, think of your family, your friends, everybody you hold dear. I'm prepared to let you walk away unscathed. All I ask is that you spare them." Ross's finger hovered over the trigger for a moment longer, disbelief warring with self-preservation. He'd assumed that Lucian's victory over both the Abomination and the Hulk stemmed from exotic powers, but that didn't mean Ross believed he was invulnerable to modern military firepower. He'd read enough about mutants to know that even the most devastating ability couldn't guarantee resistance to a bullet. Finally, Ross let out a long breath and lowered his weapon. Conceding, he stepped back. Lucian's gaze never wavered, the calm confidence of a man in full command of every gun in the field. In that instant, the general knew better than to test the edges of that power. But they'd never expected their modern weapons to be so helpless against him. Lucian frowned and snarled. "How about you try stuffing a big pole right between those front teeth of yours?" With a flick of his wrist, General Ross's incisors shot out like fangs, elongating grotesquely until they brushed against his collarbone. The general's threats died in his throat as he clamped a shaking hand over his mouth. His men, too, froze in stunned silence. "By all means, go ahead and arrest me," Lucian said coolly, "but do me a favor, have whoever's pulling the strings send me the official order. We'll sit down and negotiate tonight. I guarantee you'll find it enlightening." Nick Fury was deep in a pitched battle with Hydra and couldn't spare a thought for Lucian's antics. As for the other agencies, they lacked S.H.I.E.L.'s tracking technology, and quite frankly, they wouldn't even know where to start looking for Lucian's hidden school. Satisfied, Lucian turned to his companions. "Let's go." Instantly, every soldier in the clearing, General Ross foremost among them, collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads as if gripped by sudden migraine. Lucian drew a breath, wove a protective illusion around himself, Bruce Banner, Betty Ross, and the Abomination, then unfurled his powerful wings. In a heartbeat, they lifted off the ground, vanishing from sight and returning, unseen, to the sanctuary of their secret academy. Betty hovered above the battlefield, her silhouette framed against the drifting clouds. Below her, General Ross stood amid his troops, the weight of command etched into his posture. "Father," she called out, her voice carried on the wind, "if you still love me at all, please, do not come after us again." Ross froze, staring into the empty sky as if searching for the source of her words. For a long, tense minute, nothing moved. Then, almost simultaneously, the heavy machine guns trained on Betty's squad suddenly clattered free of their mounts and tumbled harmlessly to the ground. At last, the general drew a breath, then turned to his signal officer and barked a terse order. "Get Nick Fury on the line. I want to know exactly who she is, and arrange for the dentist immediately." Chapter 173, Lending Iron Man a Hand, 4th Update. Lucian soared toward the academy, Betty riding close beneath him. He caught the tension in her eyes and offered a teasing grin. Don't sweat your dad's teeth. A good dentist can fix those front teeth in no time. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a crimson and gold streak shot past them. Lucian instinctively banked to follow, and there, cutting through the sky with controlled thrust, was Iron Man himself. Inside the armor, Jarvis's calm voice chimed, "Sir, a significant bioenergetic signature detected ahead. Recommend proceeding with caution." Tony Stark's repulsors flared as he slowed to a hover. Bioenergy reading? Like a giant creature? He scanned the empty heavens with his helmet's enhanced optics, then tapped a control. Initiate thermal and lifeform scans. Lucian's stomach tightened. His invisibility spell, based on light refraction, worked wonders against the naked eye, but thermal sensors were another story. On Stark's HUD, 3 human-sized heat signatures and 1 massively oversized outline winked into view. Tony's visor display flickered. "So they've been hiding," he murmured. "Jarvis, lock onto all targets. I want continuous tracking." Betty's voice trembled beside Lucian. He shot her a quick, reassuring nod, then looked back to Stark. With his cover blown, there was no time left for subtleties. "Tony," Lucian called out, voice steady in the comlink. "We need your help. Those readings aren't just random creatures. Something big is coming, and it's heading right for the school." For a heartbeat, Iron Man hovered, metallic wings unfurled. Then he tipped forward, engines lighting. "Show me where," he said. "I'm on my way." Lucian dispelled the disillusionment spell and hovered into view, waving at Tony. "Hey, Tony, long time no see. Where are you headed?" Tony squinted at him, then gaped at the massive, humanoid creature chained behind Lucian. "Lucian, what? And what is that thing? It's hideous!" Lucian gave the creature a courteous nod, a product of a military experiment. "It went on a rampage across Broadway, so I knocked it out." Tony's expression sharpened as he pieced things together. "You're here. I'm here. Look, I need your help. There's a crisis in Queens. People are in danger." He paused, remembering everything that had happened since they'd last parted ways. Back then, Tony had discovered that the palladium core in his chest was slowly poisoning him. Believing his days were numbered, he'd thrown caution to the wind, pulling off one reckless stunt after another. Thanks to clues his father left behind, he'd managed to replace the toxic palladium element with a safer alternative. The poisoning receded, and Tony was back to full strength. Now, urgent new intel had surfaced. Ivan Vanko, the man who'd nearly killed him, was planning a terrorist attack at the upcoming Hammer Industries robot exhibition. Tony glanced at Lucian. "You in?" Lucian slipped into the backstage area of Hammer Industries' Grand Robotics exhibition, just as Tony Stark's voice crackled through the private comlink. "Heads up, Whiplash's bots are on the move," Tony warned. "There'll be hundreds of spectators in the hall today, including Pepper, and even more civilians outside. I can't handle this alone." Lucian, formerly known as George, tensed. He'd come prepared to assist. After all, his own abilities could tip the balance. "Understood," he replied. "Give me a moment." He ducked into his dressing room and retrieved a small, airtight case from his supply cabinet. Opening it, he revealed 2 compact nanopacks labeled Banner and Betty. These were not people, but Lucian's bioengineered allies, harmless to normal metal constructs, yet extraordinarily effective at reinforcing living tissue or neutralizing energy surges. "I'm going in," Lucian said, placing both nanopacks carefully inside a protective sleeve. "Banner Betty, stay here until I call." He snapped the case shut. Even Ivan Vanko's lethal electric whips and nickel-steel drones posed no real threat to him, but Lucian knew every edge counted. He had intended to track down Tony this week anyway. He'd recently harvested a strand of Hulk hair, planning to fuse its super-dense DNA filament into a fresh batch of alloy wands. But now, with the villain already on the prowl, there was no time to delay. As Lucian dashed for the service elevator, a final thought flickered through his mind. Thor, the Asgardian, was due to arrive any minute. Should he call in the Thunder God as backup? Life or death stakes were hardly the sort of thing you handed over to a hammer-wielding deity, yet having him on the field never hurt. He tapped his comm. "Tony, Lucian here. I'm entering through the south corridor. If you need Thor, just say the word." Stark's chuckle crackled back. "Got it. And Lucian? Thanks for the backup." Lucian pressed his palms to the wall, activating his kinetic charge. With a soft hum, he burst through the corridor door, ready to face Vanko's metal horde and save every soul in the hall. Meanwhile, Banner and Betty lay dormant in their capsule, eager to leap into action whenever their master called. "Boss, isn't your box a little small?" Bruce Banner and Betty Ross exchanged uneasy glances. They both knew Iron Man's reputation and didn't want any trouble, but the device in Lucian's hand looked scarcely larger than his palm. "How on earth could they fit inside?" Lucian grinned. "Looks small out here," he said, tapping the box. "But inside it's as big as a mansion. There's room for all of you." With a swift motion, he opened the box and, one by one, slid in Banner, Betty, and even the hulking Abomination. When the last of them had vanished, he casually tucked the box back into his dressing room closet. Tony Stark, eyebrows raised, couldn't hide his curiosity. "Hey, how come you keep showing new tricks? I don't remember you ever doing this before." "My abilities are still evolving. Everything you see is freshly awakened," Lucian replied, flexing his wings. "But enough about me. What's been happening with you?" "I've only been catching up through the news." With that, Lucian spread his wings and lifted off, gliding alongside Stark toward the Globe Hall in Queens. As they flew, Tony filled him in. Most things were much the same as before, but after his encounter with the Black Widow, he'd been laid up in a villa under Agent Coulson's watch. Coulson was administering a temporary antidote to manage Tony's condition and keeping a close eye on him around the clock. A few days ago, S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra clashed in a brutal engagement. After the dust settled, Nick Fury ordered Agent Phil Coulson back to headquarters, freeing Tony Stark from his duties at the villa compound. Seizing the opportunity, Tony slipped away to Pepper's side, and on the way, retrieved his father's old arc reactor prototype. Working side by side, they used the design to synthesize a brand new element that would replace the palladium core in Tony's suit, finally eradicating the toxin that had been slowly poisoning him. With the new element secure, Tony invited Pepper for a quick celebration stroll, and then both of them launched into the sky, bound for the Universal Exhibition Hall in Queens. Stark rocketed straight through the glass roof, landing amid flashing cameras and curious onlookers, while Lucian activated his personal cloaking device and melted into the crowd, content to watch from the shadows. Inside the vast hall, applause thundered through the rafters. On the main stage, Justin Hammer, suave chairman of Hammer Industries, glided forward with the flourish of a Broadway star. He paused at the microphone, smiled at the sea of faces, and addressed the audience in a rich, confident tone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "for too long we've sent our brave soldiers and our brave first responders into harm's way without giving them the very best technology. Then Iron Man appeared, and we dared to dream that no more lives would be lost. But Mr. Stark has chosen to keep his breakthroughs all to himself. Fair? No. Right? Definitely not. That's why Hammer Industries has poured every resource into superior solutions of our own. Tonight, you'll see innovations that leave the competition and our enemies in the dust. And when the ink runs dry on tomorrow's headlines, you'll know exactly whose name is on the marquee." After delivering his opening remarks, Justin Hammer swiveled and swept his arm toward the massive display behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the future of the U.S. military, the Navy, Army, and Air Force's new special combat robot soldiers." With that, the lights dimmed. Beneath the platform, row upon row of gleaming steel automatons, designed by Ivan Vanko, rose into view. The crowd gasped as mechanized warriors, each more imposing than the last, locked into rigid formation. Hammer let the moment hang for a heartbeat before continuing, his voice brimming with false humility. "And now, for our pièce de résistance, the commanding comprehensive threat response combat armor suit, piloted by none other than Air Force Lieutenant Colonel James Rhodey Rhodes." The cover dropped, revealing War Machine for the first time. The suit, an upgraded version of the original Mark armor Tony Stark had gifted Rhodes, stood poised and lethal, its heavy artillery glinting under the spotlights. A murmur of surprise ran through the audience as Hammer eagerly claimed credit. All thanks to Hammer Industries, truly a marvel of American engineering. Just as stunned faces turned toward War Machine, a sudden flash of light cut through the hall. Iron Man, absent from the public eye for more than 2 months, descended from above in a blaze of red and gold. Hammer's grin vanished in an instant, replaced by palpable guilt. Below, the crowd erupted in cheers. To them, the robot soldiers and war machine were untested novelties. But Iron Man, Tony Stark himself, had already proven his worth 1,000 times over. And now, with his spectacular return, the gathered spectators knew exactly whose name would endure. Iron Man isn't just a suit of armor. He's also the world's greatest inventor, its richest playboy, and its most famous celebrity. Across the field, Ivan Vanko of Hammer Industries sneered as he saw Tony Stark appear. With a few keystrokes on his remote, he seized control of War Machine and the robotic soldiers at his back. "Tony, no, my system's been hacked." In an instant, the minigun on War Machine's shoulder roared to life and swung to bear on Stark. Simultaneously, the 4 ranks of robot troops behind him snapped into formation, their weapons trained on Iron Man. Chapter 174, Angels Descend, 5th Update. A chorus of terrified screams erupted in the exhibition hall as the robot soldiers suddenly lost control and opened fire on Iron Man. "Come out and fight me!" Tony Stark bellowed, his voice barely audible over the onslaught of machine gun fire. Realizing he was the target, Tony rocketed out of the hall, thrusters blasting. The rogue war machines and aerial drones tracked him relentlessly, spitting bullets in his wake. On the ground, Army and Navy bots, anti-aircraft cannons raised, prepared to join the pincer attack, coordinating with the drones to trap him between sky and earth. But just as they surged toward the exit, a figure materialized before them. Lucian stood tall, his cloak drifting as the shimmering veil of his disillusionment curse fell away. He met the oncoming robot's cold mechanical eyes. "I think it's best if you all stay right where you are," he said calmly. In a remote command center, Ivan Vanki watched in fury as Lucian obstructed his forces. "Eliminate him," he snarled, frantically redirecting both ground and air units to target Lucian. Moments later, every Army and Navy robot on Ivan's monitors flashed crimson and went dark. The live feed dissolved into static. "What the?" Ivan stared at the blank screen, disbelief etched across his face. Back at the exhibition hall's threshold, the frozen war machines stood silent, guns unmoving, servos locked. Lucian lowered his hand, eyes still scanning the ranks of inert metal. From above, Tony Stark circled warily, assessing the unexpected calm below. "Nice timing," Tony radioed, voice crackling with relief. Lucian gave a curt nod. Together, they prepared for whatever would come next, knowing that, for now, they had turned the tide against Ivan Vanki's mechanical army. Lucian's HUD flickered with panic. Half his army of drones and war machines had collapsed in an instant, their circuits fried from the inside out. Could Tony Stark really have that much firepower? He hadn't seen any missile trails or impact craters beneath the exhibition hall. Nothing to suggest an all-out bombardment. And yet, one moment his forces were functional, the next they lay smoking and inert. A more disturbing thought struck him. Had someone breached his control system? It sounded impossible. His cybersecurity protocols were rock solid. Besides, his aerial squadron above still obeyed every command. Why then had only the ground units been disabled? Lucian shook his head. He couldn't afford to be distracted by questions he couldn't answer. Revenge on Iron Man was his sole objective, and nothing, not even a ghost in his software, would derail him. Back inside the hall, Lucian strode among a cluster of mechanized sentries. Their heavy frames were crumpled on the polished floor, weapons limp at their sides. A moment ago, as they lunged to attack, he had uttered a single incantation, a crystalline wave of frost that had swept through their joints, freezing hydraulics and circuitry in one sweep. Now, a thin mist rose from their still-hot servomotors. With a flick of his wrist, Lucian dispelled the lingering frost. The robot's chassis groaned as metal met ice, but they remained immobilized. Satisfied, he tapped a command on his console. Beyond the hall's reinforced doors, his aerial drones regrouped, engines humming in anticipation. He allowed himself a cold smile. Let Stark play with half my army, Lucian thought. He had other weapons at his disposal, and the night was still young. Iron Man would discover soon enough that underestimating Lucian was his gravest mistake. Tonight, vengeance would be served. Lucian watched the line of mechanical soldiers advance, their servos whirring in perfect unison. He'd spent hours dissecting every facet of the freezing spell, one of his more curious discoveries being that despite its name, it has nothing to do with brute cold. Instead, it subtly bends the flow of time around its targets, halting living creatures and halting Muggle machinery in mid-operation. In its effect, it's a cousin to the repair charm. Both are, at their core, small manipulations of temporal energy. In the wider wizarding world, time magic has always held a magnetic allure. From simple, hour-reversal incantations to the intricately crafted time-turners that ferry witches and wizards hours into the past, magical scholars have long probed the secrets of the fourth dimension. It made perfect sense, then, that both the mending spell and the freezing spell would emerge as practical applications of those very principles. Lucian straightened his shoulders and stared again at the foot soldiers of steel. Better to destroy them outright than risk incapacitating them only to have them reactivate, or worse, explode. Rumor had it that Ivan Vanko's engineers had planted detonators deep in each chassis. A confident smile touched Lucian's lips. "All right," he said under his breath, "let's reduce these tin cans to slag." He raised his hand and willed the fire to come. In an instant, a searing jet of white-hot flame lanced from his palm, striking the nearest robot. The metal plating hissed, cracked, and within seconds had collapsed into a glowing pool of molten iron. Each subsequent burst of flame met the same fate. One by one, the machines melted and slumped, their twisted circuits and shattered pistons dissolving into molten ruin. Lucian lowered his hand, the heat dissipating as quickly as it had appeared. He eyed the smoking remains with satisfaction, and with the knowledge that, when it came to the next threat, he'd be ready. Lucian watched the frost-encrusted robot soldiers shatter under his spell, then swept his hand in a blaze of fire that turned their metal frames into molten slag. Normally, the machines would have detonated once the freeze spell wore off, but now there'd be no last-minute explosion. "Lucian?" A shout below drew his attention. Pepper, having spotted him in the stands, was already racing up the ramp. "What's happening?" "Tony called for help," Lucian replied, folding shut the glowing runes in his palm. "I'll explain everything later." He didn't wait for more questions. With a powerful beat of his snow-white wings, he launched himself skyward. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the remaining spectators. Some covered their mouths in awe. "An angel," one woman whispered. "He saved us." Above the exhibition hall, Tony Doggles darted through a hail of laser fire, his sleek fighter barely outpacing the attack drones and aerial war machines surrounding him. He'd already obliterated half the oncoming threat, but the rest pressed in, their firepower almost overwhelming. "Tony, 9 o'clock low," Lucian called out, his voice amplified by a quick arcane chant. He hovered 10 feet above the fray, ready to guide his friend through the swarm. "Their convective array has a blind spot behind that wrecked cargo drone. Go now!" With Lucian's precise direction, Tony banked sharply and roared into the breach, the two of them turning the tide of the battle in a single coordinated strike. Lucian hovered in midair, eyes fixed on Tony, as the last of the ground-level robots collapsed behind him. No sooner had Tony realized Lucian had dispatched the mechanical soldiers below than he spun a full 180 degrees and rocketed back toward him. Hot on Tony's heels came the massive war machines and the smaller robotic infantry, every one of them under Ivan Vanky's control. Sensing their advance, Lucian's right hand shot up. "Submit," he ordered. Instantly, his magnetic power flared to life. A rippling, invisible field snapped outward, clamping onto the steel hull of the war machines and seizing every robot soldier in its reach. Lucian knew his magnetic restraint could only hold 1,000 pounds worth of force. If any of these automata were operating at full capacity, they could tear themselves free. But he didn't need a permanent bind. He only needed to keep them frozen for an instant. That instant was all the time he required. "Rain of light," he intoned. A radiant glyph blossomed above Lucian's head, casting him in a halo of pure white brilliance, like an avenging angel, newly descended. From that luminous circle, thousands of streaks of searing light arced outward. They struck the robots with surgical precision. Where steel once stood, there was only shredded metal, each automaton disintegrated as though it were paper set aflame, bursting apart in midair. The shattered remains drifted away on the wind in a glittering, deadly snowfall. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the faint hum of dissipating energy and the distant echo of crumbling armor. Lucian lowered his hand, the last wisps of light fading, and surveyed the battlefield now clear of Ivan Vanka's mechanical horde. Below is a polished, idiomatic rewrite of the passage with George renamed to Lucian and his gender clarified. All major plot beats, characters, and details have been preserved. The crowd milling outside the exhibition hall craned their necks skyward, jaws dropping at the aerial spectacle. Unbelievable, one onlooker breathed. I need to rework my EMP cannon when I get home. If I could scatter the charge like that, it'd look even cooler. High above, Lucian and Tony Stark hovered amid the wreckage of shattered drones. In a matter of seconds, Lucian had torn through the entire drone swarm. Only War Machine remained aloft. Tony watched in awe as the last robotic aircraft fell apart. He's unreal, Tony murmured, more to himself than to Lucian. Inside the War Machine armor, James Rhodey Rhodes wrestled for control, but it wasn't just a simple systems glitch. Unbeknownst to Rhodes, Ivan Vanko, the real power guiding the suit from behind the scenes, was as bewildered as anyone at how his Navy and Army robots had lost all contact. Vanko's transmission crackled. What? How is this possible? Tony cut in over the comms. Lucian, I need your help. We've got to purge whatever's hijacking his systems. He banked toward War Machine, repulsors flaring. The moment War Machine attempted to flee, its limbs froze. Lucian had condensed all that previously diffuse magnetic force around Rhodey's armor. A sudden, overwhelming bind locked every joint and servo. The suit shuddered, and then dropped like a stone. Tony landed beside the grounded armor and summoned his diagnostic HUD. Hang tight, Rhodey. We're going to reset your core and kick out any intruders. Lucian hovered nearby, magnetic fields humming around him like a living shield, ready to assist his friend. End of chapter. The heavy machine gun mounted on War Machine clicked, primed to unleash its next volley, until Lucian sprang into action. He raised his wand and called the spell clearly, Fra Dimension. In an instant, the massive weapon dissolved in midair, its metal components reassembling into a single, oversized breadstick. While everyone stared in disbelief, Tony Stark strolled up alongside the suit. With a casual flick, he peeled back a small access panel at the back of War Machine's armor and slipped his finger into the opening, probing for the hidden override. Chapter 1d5, Lucian, the Nemesis of Technology, first update. Hey, can I have my monthly pass, please? War Machine had started out as Tony's brainchild. Even after Hammer Industries tweaked the hardware and Ivan Vanko slipped in his own control protocols, Tony knew he could reverse engineer any unwanted modifications if only he had enough time. Jarvis, initiate system restoration, Tony ordered. Beginning restoration, restoring complete, the AI replied coolly. Less than 10 seconds later, Jarvis had purged Vanko's backdoor exploit, and War Machine snapped back to Latam Call, James Rhodey Rhodes's control. Rhodey flexed his fingers inside the gauntlet and couldn't resist a jab at Tony. Seriously, why'd you hide the back door right behind the... Well, you know, that's just embarrassing. Tony shrugged, grinning. It's a back door. You don't want it out in the open. I never imagined anyone would be wearing the suit mid-maintenance. Normally, I remove the armor, wheel it into the lab, and hook it up to this experimental data cable, just like plugging a desktop tower into service. No surprises that way. Lucian hadn't expected today's mission to go sideways, not this badly anyway. One moment, he was crouched behind the console. The next, he was literally using his fingertip as a makeshift data connector to rewire the system from its back door. He wiped a smear of oil off his glove and muttered to himself, next time I'll try the front panel, though, honestly, the back door's starting to grow on me. Tony Stark exchanged a glance with Rodriguez. So what now? We tracked down Ivan Vanko. Rodriguez poked at the mechanical wings strapped to Lucian's back, curiosity flickering in his eyes. He threw up his hands. That's it, isn't it? Problem is, we don't know where Vanko's holed up. We could ask Hammer Industries for intel. Don't bother, Tony cut in, turning to Lucian. He gave Lucian a knowing nod. When it comes to finding someone, you're the best tracker in the business. Lucian was about to reply when his gaze flicked upward. A slow smile spread across his face. Actually, looks like the target's already on his way to us. Jarvis's calm voice filled the workshop moments later. Sir, I've got a fast-moving object inbound with a very high-energy signature. Tony straightened, excitement flashing in his eyes. Well, that's our cue. Let's see who just RSVP'd to this party. A moment later, a hulking humanoid machine, one size larger than both Iron Man and War Machine, came to a halt before them. It was Ivan Vanko. He'd watched from afar as his robotic soldiers were incinerated and Rhodes's armor snapped free of his control. Seething, he slipped into the whipcord suit of his own design and charged in. He knew the man who'd destroyed his drones was powerful, but he had faith in his invention and in his resolve to bring Tony Stark down, even if it cost him his life. As he approached, Vanko whispered to himself, "Once I draw blood from this so-called god, people will see he's mortal, and when they see that, they'll come for his technology and his empire." A cruel smile spread behind his visor. "Don't move," he called out, voice echoing through the armored surround. "It's time you met my ex-wife." Before Lucian or Tony could react, Vanko unleashed the whipcords coiled around his wrists, their energy crackling like living lightning. But Rhodes was already moving. The instant control of his War Machine armor returned, he rocketed forward, interposing himself between Vanko and the two men. "Behind me!" Rhodey snapped, shoulder-mounting a custom launcher at the ready. In that heartbeat of silence, metal against metal, they braced for the coming storm. Lucian felt a surge of relief now that the armor was free of Ivan Vanko's control, but his anger still burned hot. The so-called ex-wife Vanko had been taunting them about wasn't a person at all, but the deadliest weapon Tony Stark had added to the suit during his last retrofit, a tiny shoulder-mounted Sidewinder missile, small enough to underestimate, but powerful enough to evel a bunker. "What ex-wife?" Stark asked, cocking an eyebrow. Before anyone could explain, the missile launcher hissed open. "Bu." The little rocket spat out from War Machine's right shoulder, then simply struck Vanko's whipcord armor without detonating and plummeted to the ground, harmless. "Did Hammer never tell you it needs a certain velocity and distance to arm itself?" Vanko taunted, folding his arms. "Otherwise, it's just a dud." He laughed, then slammed his gauntlets together. Instantly, two polished titanium whips crackled with high-voltage current as they ejected from his wrists. From behind Lucian and the others, Stark muttered, "Hammer's Sidewinder, trash even by Hammer's standards." "Let me show you how fragile you really are," Vanko snarled. With a roar, he surged forward, his electrified whips lashing through the air as he charged straight at Lucian and his companions. Tony and War Machine unleashed their suit's weapons on Van Key, but his whipcord armor held firm, each blast smashing harmlessly off its reinforced plating. Meanwhile, Lucian reached out and froze the whipcord midair, just as he had the drones moments ago. Tony cocked an eyebrow. "What? Planning a 5-whip lightning show now?" Lucian grinned. "Close. Only my whipcord suit is leagues above your standard combat bots." He braced himself, reactor core glinting through his chest plate as he funneled every ounce of kinetic energy into the whip. With a crackling surge, he shattered the magnetic field pinning it and lunged at the three of them in one fluid motion. Van K staggered back, eyes widening as he realized the difference. He'd managed to disrupt the robot's controls just enough to hamper their attacks, but Lucian's suit operated on a level of power the drones could never match. So long as Lucian kept his reactor humming at full tilt, no magnetic interference could stop his whipcord from striking true. "I'm in no mood for games. I need to get back," Lucian said coolly. An electrified whip shot toward him, but Lucian merely flicked his wrist. "Disarm!" A pulse of arcane energy slashed through the air, yanking the whip from Wan K's grip. Before Wan K could even register the loss of his weapon, Lucian's hand pressed against the sleek armor plating of the now unarmed combat suit. Mimicry transformation. Lucian's signature magic flared in a swirl of motes. The state-of-the-art whipsuit shuddered, its polished alloys corroding within seconds, as panels buckled and rivets popped loose. Where once stood a high-performance battle rig, now stood nothing more than a rusted, decrepit shell. In the world of Apprentice mages, mimicry was Lucian's trump card. He couldn't breathe life into the inanimate, nor conjure intricate automata from thin air, but he excelled at downgrading advanced technology into useless scrap. Supercars turned into jalopies, sleek reconnaissance drones into rattling tin cans, even massive war tanks crumbled into off-brand farming equipment. No cutting-edge device could withstand his touch. He was the very bane of high-tech wonders. Lucian straightened, his expression unreadable, ready for whatever his opponent might try next. Tony Stark and War Machine both took a sharp step back, eyes fixed warily on Lucian's outstretched hand. They didn't want to risk being caught in whatever he was doing. In a way, Lucian's power was reminiscent of the Transfiguration charm taught at Hogwarts, only far more versatile. Anyone who'd studied Transfiguration knew the rule. The more complex an object, the harder it was to recreate. That was why the NEWT level exam confined itself to turning an owl into a small telescope, simple enough to test a student's skill, yet fiendishly difficult in practice. Ask any student to transfigure a modern firearm or a piece of advanced technology, and they'd be utterly stumped. Even Professor McGonagall, the school's foremost transfiguration expert, couldn't cobble together an airplane or a cannon from thin air. Transfiguration did have one edge over Lucian's mimicry. It could transform living creatures. Remember Barty Crouch Jr., masquerading as Mad-Eye Moody? He swore he was using high sorcery to turn Draco Malfoy into a ferret, something Lucian's talent simply couldn't replicate. But when it came to inanimate objects, steel, circuitry, weaponry, Lucian was in a league of his own. Tony and Rhodey exchanged glances. Neither wanted to be the next unwitting test subject for a power that could rebuild the most intricate machine with a single touch. So they fell back, keeping their distance, and watched in guarded awe as Lucian prepared to demonstrate just how deep his mimicry truly ran. Chapter 176, The School's New Guardian, Second Update. Tony, I'll leave him in your care, Lucian said, relaxing the magnetic field that held Ivan Vanko's alloy shell in midair. I've got another matter to handle, so I'm heading back now. Oh, and could you fabricate a few more sets from those prototype designs I gave you? I'll pick them up tomorrow morning. Tony Stark grinned and casually looped one arm through the suspended form of Ivan. No problem at all. 2 sets, 10 sets, 100 sets. If it can be printed, I'll have it ready by sunrise. The alloy was notoriously expensive, practically priceless to anyone else, but for Tony, it was petty cash. With the mastermind of the attack now in custody, Lucian felt confident the crisis had been contained. Everything seemed calm until Ivan Vanko, motionless all this time, curled his lips into an eerie smile and hissed, "Think you've won? Let's all die together." In an instant, Vanko's body detonated. The blast tore through the hangar, hurling Lucian, Tony, and Colonel James Rhodes against bulkheads and support struts. Tony, clutching the exploding shell, bore the brunt of the shockwave. His armor screeched and sparked as metal fragments tore at the plating. Lucian was slammed into a nearby column, losing consciousness before he even hit the deck. Rhodes covered his ears against the roar, then sprang forward through the choking smoke as alarms began to shriek throughout the facility. When the dust settled, Tony's repulsor gauntlets were dented, circuits flickering unpredictably. He struggled upright, chest plate cracked, his voice a rasp. "Rhodes, medical, now." Rhodes dropped to one knee beside him and nodded. "You heard him," he barked over his shoulder at rushing medics. Then he turned back to Lucian, clearing debris off the edge of the support beam where he'd collapsed. "Lucian, you okay?" Lucian groaned, blinking through the haze. He pushed himself up, wincing as his ribs protested. "Too close," he muttered. Outside, flashing red lights painted the night sky. Emergency crews flooded into the hangar, stretcher in hand. Beneath the twisted wreckage of Vanko's alloy shell lay the final proof that the threat was far from over. Someone had planned this last, lethal trap. As Tony was led away on a gurney and medics bundled Lucian onto another, Rhodes surveyed the smoking remains, his jaw set in grim determination. The real fight, he realized, was only just beginning. Ivan Vanko must have known he was losing when his robot legions fell before them so easily. Cornered and desperate, he'd swallowed a high-yield mystery bomb, his final card. The moment Tony pinned him down, Ivan detonated it from within. "Deploy the ironclad ward," Lucian shouted, but the blast wave struck with such ferocity that it hurled him 10 meters through the air. Tony and Rhodes fared no better. They were blown clean off their feet, plummeting toward the plaza below in a shower of debris. Lucian landed hard, dust and stone cascading around him. He rose, dispelled the ward, and stared at the carnage. Ivan Vanko's body reduced to fragments across the cobblestones. He shook his head in disbelief. Was such savage self-destruction really necessary? Even a direct blast from the inside would at worst incapacitate Tony, not kill him. If Ivan had simply surrendered, the worst fate awaiting him was a cell with no hope of escape. Now there was no one left to answer for his crimes. Clenching his fists, Lucian remembered the old saying, "Cherish the green hills, and worry not for fuel." He'd always believed in preserving strength and options. This wanton waste of life went against everything he stood for. Shaking off the aftershocks, he looked up just in time to see Tony and Rhodes crash into the plaza, battered but alive. That at least was something. Rhodes had just enough distance to react in time, raising his arms to shield his chest. Though the impact spun him around and left him momentarily stunned, the injury was minor. Tony, however, had been standing too close. He never saw the blast coming, and the front of his steel suit exploded inwards, tearing away the chest plate and leaving a deep, bloody gash. "Lucian, you're going to have to call an ambulance for me," Tony gasped, collapsing onto the ground. He managed a weak half-smile. "I didn't expect him to carry a bomb in his body. Doesn't he worry he won't be able to pull it out if he wins?" Lucian knelt beside him, shaking his head. "An ambulance won't be necessary. You won't die from a scratch like that as long as I'm here." He reached out, palm glowing with soft white magic, and pointed at Tony's wound. "Heal." Immediately, a pale light spread over torn metal and flesh, knitting them back together in mere seconds. Tony's armor reformed, the gash closed, and he felt warmth flood back into his chest. The pain vanished as if it had never been. Lucian rose, brushing dust from his sleeve. "This isn't holy light magic from fairy tale," that he explained quietly. "It's the lost sky magic Makarov told me about. Fortunately, in this world, thanks to the magic that still lingers here, such healing still exists." Tony sat up, running a cautious hand over his restored armor. "I owe you one," he said with a grin. Lucian merely nodded. In a place where ancient spells survived in hidden corners, some wounds could be undone, and today that made all the difference. Over the summer, while mastering the shadowless countercurse to accelerate his own recovery, Lucian also devoted countless hours to more conventional healing charms. Under the guidance of Aurora Amy, renowned for her expertise in restorative magic, he'd made remarkable strides. He couldn't yet perform the miracles Amy could, let alone Madame Pomfrey, who once reattached a student's severed limb, but Lucian could now mend nearly any injury, provided the patient survived the initial trauma. Tony's cut was hardly a real test of his skill. "Tony!" Pepper came barreling out of the exhibit hall, practically throwing herself onto him. She patted him anxiously, her voice trembling. "Are you okay? Does it hurt anywhere?" Lucian exchanged a wry glance with Rhodes. Both of them glanced up at the sky, silently agreeing they'd seen more than enough. "Let's get out of here," Lucian whispered. Moments later, they apparated back to Hogwarts, relieved to leave Pepper fussing over Tony, and glad to escape an overload of sweetness. After returning to campus, they unloaded Banner and Betty from the containment crate and handed them over to the professor. "Hurry, resuscitate them," the professor ordered. Lucian stepped forward, raised his staff, and muttered the revival incantation. A pulse of pale light washed over the abomination's body, and with a strangled roar, the monstrous form thrashed awake. Its bulbous eyes locked onto Lucian, its claws flexing for the kill. In an instant, Lucian's shape blurred and swelled until he towered nearly 30 feet tall. With a single bone-shaking slap, he sent the abomination sprawling across the courtyard. Before the creature could rise, Lucian had crushed its skull in one massive hand, his voice a low rumble. "Settle down, or I won't hesitate to rip your head off." In this colossal form, Lucian's strength dwarfed even the abomination's legendary power. Each blow he struck carried the weight of a breaking mountain, and his magical reserves only fueled the fury in his fists. The abomination, already stunned by 2 direct hits, twisted in agony under Lucian's grip. Blood trickled from the corners of its mouth as it gasped. "Okay, I'll calm down. I surrender." Lucian released him without a word, then stepped back to full height. His eyes were ice. "You have 2 choices," he said evenly. "First option, I beat you to death right here, and it won't be pretty. Second option, you serve as custodian at our school for 5 years. Once those 5 years are up, you walk free, no questions asked." He folded his arms and looked the abomination dead in the eye. The choice was clear: life under Lucian's roof, or a permanent grave in the courtyard. "I don't want to choose either," Hatred thought. But whoa, and he met Lucian's unreadable stare. He bit his lip and nodded. It seems I have no choice. Just, please keep your word. Lucian's lips curved into a thin smile. I always keep my word. But don't think you can feign agreement, then slip away. I have resources. I can find anyone anywhere. Try to run and I'll hunt you down. No mercy. He reached out and patted the hulking figure beside him. With a slow shimmer, the creature, abomination, shrunk back to its ordinary size. Before stepping out of the underground simulation chamber, Lucian issued a final command. Stay here for a few days. Keep your normal form until you learn to control yourself. I don't want you scaring the kids on campus. Neither the professor nor Hatred was fooled. They had witnessed Lucian's power firsthand and understood exactly what he could and could not do. More importantly, Lucian now appreciated that Hatred wasn't truly evil, only fiercely competitive, an intensity that had left him vulnerable to outside influence. Lucian was certain that Professor X was just the person to handle individuals like that. If they met a few more times, perhaps he'd even decide he never wants to leave the school. 5 years, be damned. Lucian gave a quick greeting to Professor X that morning before apparating to the front gates of Stark's mansion. The security camera pivoted to scan him, and Jarvis's calm voice chimed through the intercom. Good morning, Mr. Lucian. Sir is awaiting you in the laboratory. The reinforced iron doors ground open, and Lucian slipped inside. Since Obadiah Stane's mercenaries had stormed the estate, slaughtering nearly every guard, Tony refused to rehire a security detail. His one-time driver and bodyguard, Happy Hogan, had moved over to Stark Tower as Pepper's head of security. In Tony's eyes, if no one could threaten him directly, armed guards were just extra lives on the line. Lucian crossed the grand foyer and descended to the subterranean workshop, where Tony was already hunched over a drafting table, fresh sketches of a new battlesuit spread out before him. For all his reputation as a carefree playboy, Tony Stark never cut corners on his craft. Even after a late night in Hollywood, the moment an idea struck, he was back here, focused, meticulous, and fully in his element. Lucian stepped into the lab just as Tony set aside a blueprint. Lucian, perfect timing. I stayed up all night fabricating 5 complete sets of the alloy wands you asked for, Tony said, nodding toward a large crate brimming with sleek metal rods. Lucian moved forward and carefully transferred each wand into his own case. After a moment, he looked up. So now that Pepper's officially in charge of the company, you've got a lot more downtime? Absolutely, Tony replied with a grin. He tapped a console, and his robotic arm, Bebin, glided forward to pour him a glass of red wine. No more chlorophyll juice or boardroom drama. Pepper and I are solid, so I can focus all my energy on new power sources and suit upgrades, plus the occasional anti-terror sweep. To be honest, though, it's starting to feel a bit tame. He raised his glass. Hey, have you ever thought about teaching? We could use a part-time instructor at the Institute, and Logan's been dying for an excuse to grab a drink with you. Lucian paused by the crate, weighing the offer. He'd been thinking it over for days. Sharing his field experience with students might be just the change of pace he needed. Lucian watched from the shadows as Nick Fury addressed the council, laying out the grim reality. Thanos would not rest until he'd claimed every Infinity Gem, and Earth would be his next target. Fury's solution, to assemble a team of extraordinary individuals, sounded sensible. Better to stand ready than be caught unprepared when the Mad Titan's army arrived. Lucian understood the stakes. If Thanos laid waste to the planet, Lucian's friends, his teachers and classmates, would pay the price. He had no intention of blocking Fury's Avengers initiative. Yet he bristled at the idea of the government calling the shots. Experience had taught him that bureaucrats and spy agencies inevitably sought to rein in anyone they deemed unpredictable, a category Lucian knew he filled all too well. He thought back to the last time Thanos struck Earth. The government's response had been feeble. Fury had managed only to page Captain Marvel after the worst was over. Lucian wasn't about to repeat that mistake. This time, he would build a team around himself. Heroes united by choice and loyalty, not by top-down orders. Fate, it seemed, was on his side. His academy was currently recruiting super-powered instructors, and 2 of the world's most famous champions, Captain America and the Hulk, had already signed on. His friendship with Tony Stark ran deep, Convincing the genius inventor to join wouldn't be hard. With Steve Rogers' leadership, Bruce Banner's strength, and Tony's technology, Lucian could coordinate a true strike force. In just 2 days, he would set out to aid Thor, forging the alliances and plans that might one day save the world from Thanos' wrath. By now, most of the original Avengers had already boarded Lucian's warship. Lucian thought ahead. Once things settled, he'd recruit more students and instructors to train them thoroughly. Maybe if Thanos ever returned with his cosmic army, he wouldn't even have to show up in person. His school's professors and pupils could make the Mad Titan regret setting foot in the universe. There was no need to overcomplicate things or waste time. Sometimes readiness was all that mattered. Jacket Wolf had just asked him out for a drink. Lucian grinned to himself. "All right, I won't back down this time," he promised. But honestly, playing teacher to a classroom full of kids, that might be my toughest mission yet. When Tony Stark received Lucian's invitation, his face lit up. Then, almost as quickly, he hesitated. For all his daily pomp and acclaim, Tony had remarkably few true friends. There was Rhodey, always an ally but perpetually buried in official duties. Happy, half his heart but busy protecting Pepper. And Ethan, who'd gone back to his hometown to provide free medical care to those in need. In Lucian and Logan, Tony recognized genuine friendship, people he could trust implicitly. And now, Lucian was asking him to join in something far bigger than any solo flight in a suit of armor. Lucian frowned as he realized the two men still didn't trust him. They hadn't shared the school's location or even invited him for a visit. That lingering wariness made him uneasy, until he floated the idea of bringing them on as part-time instructors. Suddenly, their reluctance vanished. "Don't you have any confidence?" Lucian teased. Tony Stark shot back, indignant. "Who do you think I am? I graduated MIT at 17 with top honors. I've lectured at every major university you can name. I hardly need to teach a handful of kids at your school." Lucian arched an eyebrow. "Then come see it for yourself. Interested?" Tony's expression shifted from pride to anticipation in a heartbeat. "Lead the way." Before Tony could change his mind, Lucian grabbed his arm and apparated them straight to the Mutant Academy. The moment the world snapped back into focus, Tony staggered, retching twice as though he'd been squeezed through a rubber tube. "Ugh," he groaned, wiping his mouth. "Next time, I'm flying in my suit. That was unpleasant." Lucian merely chuckled. "I'll text you the address." Lucian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small glass orb. "Next time you come here on your own, don't forget this." He tossed it to Tony. Tony caught it easily and turned it over in his hand. "What is it?" Lucian smiled. "It holds a fragment of my energy. I've disguised the school with a special barrier. Only those carrying one of these orbs can see the grounds and pass through safely." Satisfied, Lucian led Tony across the campus. They hadn't gone far when they ran into Dr. Banner and Dr. Betty, the school's 2 new faculty members. Lucian greeted them cheerfully. "Good morning, Banner. Good morning, Betty. Did you rest well last night?" Banner returned the smile. "Good morning, Principal. I slept better than I have in ages. No worries about transformations." Lucian introduced them. "Banner, Betty, this is Tony Stark. Tony, you met them briefly yesterday." Tony stepped forward, giving Dr. Banner a friendly clap on the shoulder, an unusually warm gesture for a first meeting. "It's great to finally catch up in person, Dr. Banner. I've read your positron research. It's outstanding work." Banner's polite grin flickered with pride. "Thank you, Mr. Stark." He straightened his glasses, looking both pleased and a little bashful under Tony's praise. The 4 of them continued down the path, the morning sun glinting off the glass orb in Tony's hand, the barrier now a distant concern behind them. Chapter 178. Lucian steps into the role of prophet, 4th update. After greeting Bruce Banner and Dr. Betty Ross, Lucian led Tony Stark through the sunlit corridors of Xavier's school to introduce him to Wolverine, Professor Charles Xavier, and the assembled students. Lucian and Logan exchanged quick nods. They were old acquaintances, while this marked Lucian's first proper meeting with the legendary headmaster. Their conversation paused as the low hum of the X-Fighter's engines grew louder outside. Moments later, the jet landed on the runway, and Steve Rogers stepped out in full Captain America attire. "Steve, I thought you weren't due back until tonight," Lucian called, hurrying forward. Steve offered a tired smile. I couldn't stay there any longer. Peggy can't stay awake for long, and I didn't want to jostle her rest. Lucian saw the sadness flicker in Steve's eyes. The vibrant young soldier Steve had once been was now a man marked by decades of separation. Peggy Carter had married, raised children, and her hair had turned silver, all while Steve slept through the years. He drew in a steadying breath. Life moves on, Steve said quietly. It does, Lucian agreed, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. But I'm glad you're back. He turned to Tony. Steve, this is Tony Stark, our part-time instructor and resident genius. Tony stepped forward with a grin, extending his hand. Good to meet you, Captain. Steve clasped it firmly. Likewise, Mr. Stark. As Steve and Tony fell into easy conversation, Lucian watched them with satisfaction. One by one, the pieces were coming together, Avengers and X-Men united under a single roof, ready for whatever lay ahead. Lucian glared at the towering figure standing before him, the hero who'd name-dropped his father at least 1,000 times. It was enough to drive anyone up the wall. Finally, Lucian couldn't hold back. Hey, Captain, he blurted, where are your aerobics tights today? Steve Rogers stiffened, one eyebrow arching. Lucian, he replied gravely, you might try calling me Uncle Steve. Your father and I are closer than brothers. The corners of Steve's mouth twitched, but the remark stung. He'd come to this briefing expecting cooperation, not snide jokes from one of his friend's kids. Why did it feel like they were at odds? Behind them, Logan leaned toward Professor X, his voice low. You know, Charles, this is just like when you first met Scott. He saved your life back then. Give them time. They'll warm up to each other. Professor X nodded, a gentle smile on his lips. Exactly. Both are good souls. They'll see that soon enough. Steve let out a small sigh as he rejoined the group. Perfect timing, Lucian. Everyone's here now. He gestured toward the others gathering at the far end of the hangar. Let's get started. Lucian rose from his seat and held up a hand. Everyone, I have something important to share. He didn't pause to referee the bickering between Tony and Steve. Instead, he guided them down the hall to the school's main conference room, where Bruce Banner and Betty Ross were already seated around the polished table. Once the door clicked shut behind them, Lucian turned, his expression serious. I've developed a new ability. Tony leaned back, arms folded. Another one? What does this one do? Lucian drew in a steadying breath. I've gained the power of foresight. I keep having involuntary visions, brief flashes of things that haven't happened yet. A hush fell over the room. They all knew Lucian's powers were growing, but this ability felt different, weightier. He clasped his hands on the tabletop. I'm telling you, because we can't afford any more internal conflicts. If we face an outside threat together, our unity has to be rock solid. Think about it. If the Avengers had known from the start about Thanos' plan to collect the Infinity Stones and wipe out half the universe, would the Sokovia Accords ever have come to pass? He let his gaze sweep the table, letting the question sink in. Don't worry, I'm not about to unload every cosmic horror at once. We'll take it one step at a time, but I needed you all to know. Things are changing, and we'll only stand a chance if we move forward as a team. Lucian knew he couldn't stand by while Loki marshaled an army of Chitauri to invade Earth, just as he'd seen happen in the movies. If there was any way to stop it before it began, he had to seize it. After all, this wasn't the main universe. There was no telling what other horrors might turn up alongside the Chitauri. A new breed of invader could be even deadlier, stronger than anything S.H.I.E.L.D. or even Thor himself could handle. The smartest move was to nip the threat in the bud. But Lucian's warning to Nick Fury about Hydra's resurrection earlier had spread S.H.I.E.L.D. thin, so he knew Fury's agency might not have the manpower to tackle Thor's intergalactic problems on top of battling Hydra cells. And with these butterfly effect ripples in play, there was no guarantee Thor would arrive in time, or even be worthy when he did. Facing the Destroyer alone would be a suicide mission, and Lucian still didn't know how formidable this universe's Loki truly was. If he turned out to be nothing more than a shady backstabber with a knife, fine. But if he wielded the arcane might of the Nine Realms' chief sorcerer, Lucian might be in far over his head. Lucian stood before the gathered heroes and laid out his proposal. He wanted to lead Iron Man, Captain America, and the others on an expedition beyond the known boundaries of their universe, into a hidden realm inhabited by entirely different beings. According to his visions, that parallel world existed just beyond the edge of reality. A prophecy? You really think you can predict the future? Someone scoffed. A ripple of disbelief ran around the room. Super strength, energy manipulation, even teleportation could, in theory, be explained by advanced science or quantum phenomena. But precognition defied all logical framework. Before skepticism could drown him out, Professor X raised a hand, his voice calm and authoritative. Mutant abilities span a vast spectrum, and precognitive talents have appeared among us before. There's no reason to dismiss Lucian's claim outright. The real question is, what did your vision reveal that compels us to act? All eyes turned to Lucian, curiosity sparking in every gaze. Yes, Lucian, Professor X prompted. What did you see? Lucian's face was grave as he spoke. I saw alien armies invading Earth, he said quietly. And then, we were fighting desperately to protect our planet from them. Tony Stark leaned back in his chair, amusement flickering across his features. Lucian, are you sure you didn't just have a dream? Or maybe a vision, not a literal warning? A ripple of nervous laughter followed, but the tension in the room only thickened. In their world, no hard evidence had ever proved the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations, let alone a hostile armada bent on conquest. Such tales were confined to science fiction novels, not briefing rooms. Bruce Banner and Betty Ross exchanged uneasy glances. Both respected scientists believed humanity was unlikely to be alone in the cosmos, but none had anticipated an actual in-the-flesh, or rather, in-the-starships, visit. Steve Rogers, Captain America, sat forward, his expression earnest yet puzzled. Since being thawed from the ice, he'd been trying to adapt to 21st-century science and technology. Concepts like alien biology and interplanetary travel still felt more like illusions than reality. Silence settled over them all. Then Lucian cleared his throat and pressed on. I know how unbelievable it sounds, he said, voice steady. But I was there. We fought side by side. Human soldiers, Avengers, even some creatures I'd never seen before. Aliens do exist. They've already set foot on our world. The room remained silent, charged with a sudden, uneasy certainty. Lucian leaned forward, tapping the last file closed on his tablet. In truth, the government has been aware of alien activity for years. That's why they set up a secret agency called the Sky Sword Bureau, permanently stationed on a spacecraft in orbit around Earth. I managed to pull some declassified files from S.H.I.E.L.D. 15 years ago, a fleet from an unknown civilization appeared just outside our atmosphere, then vanished without any explanation. It was that encounter that pushed Nick Fury to launch the Avengers Initiative, a plan to identify and recruit people with extraordinary abilities, forging them into a team under his command to defend us against whatever might come next. Chapter 179, Thor in the Pet Shop, 5th Update. Lucian leaned back in his chair, crossing one long leg over the other. I know all about the Superboy project, he said. Cyclops offered me a spot the first time we met, but with my circumstances, there was no way I could work under him. I had to turn him down. Tony Stark rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Fury mentioned a possible alien threat to the Avengers, but nothing this detailed. Lucian, have you uncovered any concrete leads? All we've got so far is a warning that an invasion is imminent. That doesn't give us much time to prepare. Steve Rogers was already reaching for the heart of the problem. He trusted Lucian's word, and now all he could think about was how to mount a defense, or strike first. What have you got exactly? Lucian nodded. The apparent ringleader goes by Rocky. The last intel I gathered places him near Old Bridge, New Mexico. If you're free, I'd suggest we suit up and head out there. We might find evidence of what they're planning, and maybe even catch Rocky himself. Steve exchanged a glance with Tony. It's as good a lead as any, he said. We can't afford to wait. I'm in, Lucian agreed. Just drop me back at the facility so I can grab my suit, then let's get moving. Tony cracked a grin. You're always good to have on our side, Lucian. Let's gear up. He tapped a control on his wrist communicator. Stark Jet, ready for launch. As the three of them stood and headed for the hangar, the tension in the room was almost palpable, but so was their determination. An alien invasion was looming, and they were about to confront its mastermind head-on. Lucian watched the others for a moment, then spoke with quiet resolve. Even if I couldn't be on the ground right away, I'd still follow the trail of information myself. Earth's safety depends on it. But I don't think we're out of time yet. We need to move as soon as possible. Tony Stark cracked a grin. Sounds good to me. Let's roll. Steve Rogers nodded without hesitation. A man who'd thrown himself on a grenade to protect his comrades, who'd willingly been buried in rubble to save a city, of course he'd sign on for one more mission. Lucian turned to Bruce Banner and Dr. Betty. Your help would be invaluable. You two are our best scientific minds. If anyone can figure out how these aliens are breaking through our defenses, it's you. Bruce shifted his weight, uncertainty flickering across his face. Do you really think we'll make a difference? Absolutely, Lucian said firmly. We need every clue we can get. Before Bruce could reply, Dr. Betty's eyes lit up with excitement. Count me in, she said. Who wouldn't want to witness alien biology and advanced tech firsthand? And with Iron Man and Captain America watching our backs, how can I say no? Bruce exchanged a quick look with her, then gave a determined nod. All right, let's do it. With the team assembled, Lucian tapped his tablet and began laying out their plan. First thing tomorrow, we pick up Professor Halstead at the university. From there, we head straight to the suspected landing site. Lucian gathered everyone in the old chapel-turned-assembly hall and laid out the plan one final time. Okay, here's the deal, he said, voice steady. Betty and Professor Monroe will stay behind at the school. The professor's psychic wards blanket the entire campus and can even modulate hostile intent. His power mirrors mine, so it's the safest place to hold our ground. Betty, your link with Banner is crucial. Once Bruce shifts into the Hulk, your calm will keep him from turning on us or charging off after the destroyer before we're ready. He scanned the faces in the flickering candlelight. The rest of us will head to New Mexico. First, Tony's going back to suit up. Lucian glanced at Stark, who was already strapping on a control gauntlet. Then, we'll slip into that stealth fighter Lorna refurbished. Stark gave a terse nod. Understood. With roles assigned, the team dispersed. In a heartbeat, Lucian activated his phasing ability and stepped the rough solid stone, reappearing in Tony Stark's mansion workshop. Stark looked up from the workbench, where diagnostics lit up the new Iron Man armor in brilliant arcs of red and gold. Lucian, you could have called first. Tony waggled an eyebrow as he zipped the suit's collar into place. Time's short, Lucian replied. He reached into his coat and withdrew several thick, coarse strands of emerald green hair, the Hulk's. Concentrating, he wove the strands together, drawing on the latent gamma energy within them. Before long, he had fashioned 3 slender wands, each pulsing faintly with green light. He tested one on a spare crate. A focused beam of emerald energy tore through the wood as cleanly as any high-end cutting laser. Lucian's eyes gleamed. These wands outperformed his old phoenix staff by miles and felt on par with the legendary magic ring of the wizard's apprentice world. Tony finished the final safety checks on his suit and strode over. Let me guess, he said, snapping on his glove. You've cooked up another one of your arcane toys? Lucian holstered the wands in a reinforced leather satchel. Just in case the destroyer doesn't respond well to repulsor fire. These should help even the odds. Tony grinned behind his mask. Good work, Lucian. Let's hope they're enough. Outside, the roar of engines signaled the fighter jet's arrival. Gear in hand, they prepared to launch into the night, into the heart of New Mexico, and straight toward the destroyer. Lucian had learned in his previous life that the Hulk's power wasn't derived solely from gamma radiation. It actually sprang from a demonic force in another dimension. That was why anyone else who used his blood to become a Hulk could never match Bruce Banner's raw strength, nor would they grow more powerful the angrier they got. Still, Lucian sensed a sliver of possibility. When he fashioned a wand with a single strand of Hulk's hair as its core, the result exceeded even his own expectations. Now, with Tony Stark back on campus in his Iron Man armor, the strike team was assembled and ready. In truth, there wasn't much to prepare. Captain America carried only his shield. He ditched the familiar blue and red uniform. Wolverine didn't bother arming himself. His adamantium claws were all the weapon he needed. Bruce Banner and Betty Ross had fetched a handful of lab instruments from the school's research wing in case they needed to run any on-site tests. In silence, they boarded the X-Fighter and shot skyward toward Old Bridge, New Mexico. An hour later, they hovered above the town's dusty outskirts. Lucian scanned the settlement below, then gathered his team. "All right," he said, voice steady. "We need a plan, and we need to assign every one of you a role." Lucian studied the map of Old Bridge Town, its narrow streets and dark corners spread out before him. "We can't just walk in there," he said softly. "If we're too obvious, we'll blow our cover." Steve leaned over the table, tracing a finger along the main thoroughfares. "Here's what I'm thinking." He paused, about to outline his plan, but a sudden roar of engines interrupted him. In an instant, Tony rocketed out the window in his armored suit. "I'm doing an aerial sweep of Old Bridgetown. See if anything's out of the ordinary," he called back over the comms. Lucian offered Steve a reassuring nod. "It's fine. Go on." He believed every hero had their own strengths, weaknesses, and personality quirks, and he had no desire to lord over them like a big brother. He'd watched how Steve's steady planning complemented Tony's improvisation, how each man's boldness revealed the other's talents. His goal was to nurture that chemistry, then give them missions they could tackle together. When the time was right, he'd help shore up any gaps and quietly pursue his own objectives alongside theirs. If Tony insisted on flying solo, so be it. The guy's armor was eye-catching enough on its own. Once he peeled back that exterior, his entire identity would shout, "Look at me." Tony understood the risk as well as Lucian did. Steve cleared his throat, leaning closer to the map. Lucian folded his arms, ready to listen, and ready too for whatever came next. Lucian followed Steve's lead, moving with the rest of the team in lockstep. As they fanned out across the dusty street, Logan leaned back on a ruined crate, cigar smoke curling around him. "Keep it up, Steve," he drawled. He didn't care for maps or strategy. He just wanted a good fight. Let Steve and Tony handle the brains. Logan's job was the brawn. Steve nodded and continued issuing orders via their comlinks. According to the reconnaissance of Old Bridge Town, the X-Fighter had docked stealthily just beyond the eastern wall. From there, the group split into 4 squads to track down Loki. Lucian headed in from the east, Steve from the west, Logan from the south, and Banner with Betty covered the north gate. Lucian slipped through the ancient stone archway on the east side and paused outside a small pet shop. Fresh, deep hoofprints imprinted the dirt path leading to the door. Curious, he peered inside and nearly bumped into the owner, who was staring slack-jawed at a towering figure. Thor, clad in what passed for earthling clothes, towered over the counter, arms folded. "I need a horse," he announced in a voice like distant thunder. The shopkeeper swallowed. Sorry, we don't sell horses. We've got cats, dogs, and birds." "Then show me your biggest one," Thor insisted, his gaze raking the cramped shelves. Lucian tucked his hand into his jacket, ready to step in if things went sideways. He didn't yet know whether the Thunder God was friend or foe in this town, but one thing was certain. Tracking Loki through Old Bridge wouldn't be dull. The shopkeeper simply pointed to the golden retriever in the adjacent cage. "That's our largest one." Thor found himself at a loss for words. "Sir, could I help you with something?" Lucian stepped through the pet shop door and offered Saul a warm smile. Chapter 180, The Hammer That Cannot Be Lifted. "I need to travel 50 miles to retrieve my hammer, Mjolnir. If you help me, I will reward you handsomely." Thor Odinson strode out of the pet shop, his posture proud and unyielding, and addressed Lucian, who was leaning against the display window. Lucian smiled and folded his arms. "My price isn't small." "Name your reward," Thor replied, lifting his chin. All mortals cared about was gold, he thought. Once he reclaimed Mjolnir, his power and proof of his divinity would return. Then he would have no trouble paying Lucian in gold. "Very well, lead the way." Lucian waved him forward and headed toward his X-Fighter waiting on the street. Thor fell into step beside him. "By the way," Lucian said, "I'm Lucian. What's your name?" "Thor Odinson." Thor's voice was measured, but Lucian could sense the raw strength beneath it. Lucian nodded slowly. "So you really are the god of thunder." Thor halted for a moment, choosing his words with care. "I know it sounds impossible, especially since I've lost my powers here on Midgard, but I am indeed Thor, son of Odin, protector of Asgard." Lucian studied him for a heartbeat. "I believe you." Thor's chest swelled with relief. In his current, powerless state, He had nothing to prove his claim. In the past, mortals, including Jane Foster, had thought him mad. Now it seemed that one man was willing to trust him at his word. They crossed the street, and Lucian fell into step beside him. "So," Lucian said casually, "how well do you know Loki?" Thor's expression shifted, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Loki? He's my brother, still in Asgard." Thor could hardly contain his delight. This was the first time a mortal had accepted him so readily, and even knew of his brother. He boomed with laughter. "Mortal, you have very discerning eyes." Lucian met Thor's gaze without flinching. After a moment's pause, he spoke quietly. "I have a few more friends. May they come with me?" Thor waved a dismissive hand. "Of course. Just take me 50 miles northwest. There's a place marked by a hammer. Beyond that, I have no other conditions." Lucian drew his communicator from his belt. "All right, Steve, Bruce, Betty, Logan. We have what we came for. Let's head back to the jet. Tony, you know the drill. Meet us at that hammer site, 50 miles northwest of town." 10 minutes later, the fighter jet roared down the runway and lifted into the sky. Inside, Saul peered out one of the small windows, curiosity written all over his face. "Is this your human spaceship?" he asked. "It's better than the last model, but still pretty primitive." The others glanced at the blonde, bearded figure of Thor, then back at Lucian, confusion flickering in their eyes. Lucian tapped into his telepathy and sent them a brief message. "His name is Thor. He's Loki's brother, and from what I've seen of the future, he fights on our side. But he doesn't know who we are yet. Let's tail him to his destination. Maybe we'll learn something en route." Lucian and his 3 companions exchanged glances, then nodded in agreement. Saul might not strike them as the sharpest knife in the drawer, but if Lucian believed staking him out would bear fruit, they'd see it through. So far, every lead had fizzled. "I've got eyes on the hammer," crackled Tony's voice over the comms. "There's a whole crowd partying around it. I've slipped them some cash to clear out, temporarily at least." Moments later, a sleek fighter jet streaked down to the clearing and settled onto the ground in a smooth landing. Lucian led his team away from the aircraft and toward the object of their obsession, Thor's mythical warhammer, Mjolnir. Standing astride it like some challenge, Tony flexed every ounce of strength his armored suit could muster, and still the hammer didn't budge. "Lucian, there's something very strange about this thing," Tony called back, peeling off his helmet to reveal a puzzled expression. "I scanned it. Its energy readings are off the charts." Lucian stepped closer, eyes fixed on the runic symbols carved into the metal. "No mortal can lift Mjolnir," he said softly, every word heavy with meaning. Lucian shook his head and held up a hand. "Everyone, stay back." Thor, confident, towering, chest-heaving, stepped around Steve Rogers and Wolverine without a glance. His gaze was fixed on Mjolnir, the legendary hammer embedded in its icy block. Around them, the Avengers formed a rough circle, watching. Thor reached out, closed his fingers around the haft, and gave a mighty tug. The hammer didn't budge. He blinked in disbelief, planted both feet firmly on the stone slab, and hauled with all his strength. Still nothing. His jaw clenched, muscles bulged. He pulled again, voice rising in frustration. "How can this be? Why, Father Odin, do you deny me?" With a roar that echoed off the cavern walls, Thor dropped to his knees. He glanced skyward, arms raised as if demanding answers from the heavens. The assembled heroes exchanged worried looks. Tony Stark crossed his arms, eyebrows arched. "Lucian, what's the story here? Where did you find these actors?" Lucian stepped forward. "He's not an actor. He claims to be Thor, god of thunder, from the domain of the gods. He says his brother is Loki, and I've actually seen him in the future." Tony snorted. "You're kidding, right? A god in our world? He doesn't exactly scream divine royalty." Thor, still on bended knee, pressed a hand to his chest and lifted his head, eyes burning with ancient pride. Culminating the moment, Lucian turned to him and spoke softly but firmly. "Thor, if you're truly who you say you are, explain it to us. Tell us your story." All at once, the cavern fell silent, waiting for the thunder god's truth. "We might be able to help," Lucian said softly. Saul stared at him for a long moment, as if waking from a dream. Encouraged by Lucian's gentle tone, he finally began to speak. "It started a few days ago, at my coronation." Lucian listened intently as Sol told his tale. Thor had just been crowned king of the gods' realm, the grand hall of Asgard filled with nobles and deities alike. Mid-ceremony, a lone frost giant slipped past the guards and broke into the treasure vault, seeking the legendary Eternal Winter Coffin. The intruder's theft interrupted the celebration, and Thor's rage burned hotter than any forge. He demanded permission from Odin to launch a full-scale assault on Jotunheim and put the frost giants in their place once and for all. But Odin refused. He chastised his son for letting anger cloud his judgment, and reminded him that Asgard, as ruler of the Nine Realms, must act with restraint and authority. Thor seethed at the rebuke. He believed that allowing a former enemy, even one as lowly as a frost giant, to violate Asgard's sanctity without punishment would sully the realm's honor and invite future invasions. Saul fell silent, his voice trailing off. Lucian reached out and laid a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Together, they would find a way to restore Asgard's dignity and protect the Nine Realms from the threat lurking beyond its walls. Thor outright defied Odin's command, slipping away to Jotunheim with Asgard's three greatest warriors, the war goddess Sif and his brother Loki, his only true confidant. His mission was simple: find Laufey, king of the frost giants, and demand an explanation. But Laufey's pride blistered into outright contempt. He insulted the realms of the gods and sneered at Thor, calling him a little princess. Incensed, Thor hurled himself into the fray, hammer in hand. Before long, he was hopelessly outnumbered, only to be saved at the last moment by Odin's thunderous arrival. When they returned to Asgard, father and son went at each other with all the fury of the heavens. Odin declared Thor too immature to rule, stripped him of his divine strength, and banished him to Earth until he proved himself worthy. In this world, S.H.I.E.L.D. was embroiled in a war with Hydra and never even noticed a hammer crashing to the ground. No Agent Coulson came poking around. Tony leaned back, shook his head and muttered, "Do you really buy tea? Hat? Not me." Lucian guessed that the hammer wouldn't budge because the energy locked inside it was too powerful, producing an unusual physical effect.